And Marisa, are you ready to go? We're ready.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm calling to order at 5:31 p.m. the Complete Streets Commission meeting for August 31st. And I think we'll start out with establishing a quorum. I see Commissioners Maloof, Commissioners Snyder, Vice Chair Venkatraman present, and I see Commissioner Oyang is joining us right now. So absent are Commissioner Ambiel and Commissioner Katz, and Commissioner Ambiel is ill today. Hi, Cindy. Thank you. So now that we've established a quorum, let's go on to the Pledge of Allegiance. And with tradition in this commission during COVID, we just take a minute of silence and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to ourselves. So thank you. Next is public comments for items not on today's agenda. So if anyone has any members of the public have comments that are items not on the agenda, you are welcome to raise your hand in the Zoom app. If you're on the phone, I don't see anyone on the phone. So any members of the public? I am not seeing anyone with their hand raised, nor am I hearing anyone? So I don't think that we have any public comments on items not on the agenda tonight. So let's move to the consent agenda. Item number 1, the consent agenda has approving the minutes from the July 27th meeting. Before we take a motion to approve that, does anyone have any questions or comments on the minutes? I'm not seeing anyone else with questions or comments. I have a brief question. For the Questa item, I think I saw that the vote was 4-0 where it passed, but there was one abstention. I think we had one commissioner that recused. Does that count as an abstention, or that's a recusal because they didn't actually vote abstained? Can anybody confirm that? I see the vice chair nodding his head, yes. Anyone from staff have anything on that? Councilmember Weinberg is here as our liaison. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hi, hello, everyone. My understanding is that the minutes simply say that the commissioner who recused themselves, in fact, recused themselves. Their vote should not be recorded as an abstention or anything else. So it would be 4-0 with so-and-so having recused.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. That's my understanding as well. So with that, could somebody make a motion to approve the minutes with that change? And Vice Chair.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from the 27th with the amendments to reflect the vote of 4-0 and a recusal by Vice Chair.
And a second for the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Maloof. And I also see Commissioner Katz has joined us. We're voting on the consent agenda item now, which is the approval of the minutes. Good evening. And I think we can just raise our hands for this one on consent. So everyone who agrees to this, just please raise your hand, keep it up so I can see. So I see that that passes 6-0 with one person absent. And let's move on to our next agenda item, which is our update items. We have 3 items in this category. I think before we start going through those, I just want to give everyone a sense tonight is we have some items coming back to our agenda. We're checking in where our work plan is for the rest of the year and actually probably about 6 months or so. We're seeing where we're at with Saltos High School. And then we have a couple items where we're going to spend a little more time on tonight. One is AB 43. And that's the new state laws that allow cities to establish streets with lower speed limits. So I want to make sure we dedicate time for that. And then we have the citywide traffic model coming back to us. That model has not been on our agenda since long before COVID. So let's make sure we spend some time so all our new commissioners understand that. And so we get all our questions and input addressed. So just as you're making your questions and comments tonight, please keep in mind that we want to spend a good bit of time on those. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Marisa to present item number 2.
Thank you, Stacy.
Are we ready to go for this item or?
Yeah, just one second. Let me pull it up. Okay, can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay, good. So this is our work plan for the next 6 months. So it goes from now through February. Let's see if I can get it all on the screen at once. So we have our meeting today. That's the August one. September meeting is canceled. So that's an announcement for you. We have received a lot of input from you all in the last few months on really everything that we can possibly have input on at this point. And so we are going to spend September focusing on a handful of other things. It'll be backfilling some positions that are vacant. It'll be the kickoff of the construction for the resurfacing program and signage and striping program. And the large comprehensive safe routes to school signage and striping plan, and a whole handful of other things. So if you have any questions about what we're up to, feel free to reach out, or I can send updates, but we'll take September off from meeting. October, I can just kind of run through everything that's on this list, and this is a draft and subject to change based on what we kind of have ready to go and what pops up. I'm sure there'll be more things popping up between now and then as well. But October will definitely form the work plan subcommittee. And that subcommittee will put together the work plan for the next calendar year, kind of expanding on what I have here. We will do a back to school traffic observation and walk audit update. That'll be about Los Altos High. So you'll learn more on that in the Los Altos High portion of tonight's presentation. But we want to come back to you with kind of the observations and see how everything's working once it has time to settle in. We got, I think, a request from commissioners for a citywide traffic and pedestrian safety update from the police department. So we have that scheduled for October. And then we may come back with AB 43 next steps, which you'll also hear more about tonight. November and December will be a combined meeting as usual. We'll get that scheduled soon. In that meeting, we'll review the work plan. We will do the usual annual letter to council as far as priorities with the work plan attached. And then we are hoping to bring to you a bike parking ordinance for review. And then in January, we are targeting a bicycle-friendly community application. We are hoping to have an update about the RFB project that is citywide. That's what we talked about a few months ago as far as replacing the in-pavement flashing lights with the current best practice, which is RFBs. And an update on Homestead Road as that project kicks off. That's a VTA project. And we'd also like to potentially have a perhaps some sort of design charrette or some kind of programming or kickoff meeting for the first streetscape project. And then in February, we're hoping to discuss the school route improvement plans. That's the phase 2. So this year's phase 1 was all the signage and striping improvements. Phase 2 is the civil improvements, civil engineering. So that means the more constructed items, the curb ramps, sidewalks. I know speed feedback signs is included in that. So we'll have a preliminary discussion on that. We'd like to do a truck route program because that's something we've gotten requests for. We'll do an update on El Camino resurfacing, which is the Caltrans project. And that includes the addition of the bike lanes per council's approval earlier this year. And then we'll also be bringing back some preliminary data for the school route app. That was another commissioner request, was to get that data update about 6 months after the last update that we had. So that is the plan for the next 6 months. Again, we'll shift things around as necessary. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me, or Stacy, if you'd like to have comments now, we can do that as well.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have questions or comments on this? And I can't see everybody. I see Commissioner Maloof. I see you. I can't see everybody's video at the same time on screen sharing. So go ahead, Commissioner Maloof.
Yes, thank you. Just a few questions here. First, what is the status of the CSMP? Does it need any revision in this work plan, or are we done with it?
The commission is done with the CSMP, and the council has requested a couple of rounds of edits at the last 2 study sessions. And so we have done new contract amendments with the consultant as a result of those. And we're kicking off the final round of revisions now, and we're hoping to get it adopted by council in October.
Great, thank you. And then do we expect to see Questa come back again for updates?
Yeah, Questa will come back for an update. The construction will kick off in the next, well, it's going to be lumped in with the resurfacing program. So construction for that will kick off in the next probably a couple of months, and we will bring an update probably a few months after the construction of Questa is complete. So I imagine that might be March or so.
Okay, great. And then the last question, maybe that's a question to the chair. More so, when do we expect to fill in the remainder of 2023 on this agenda?
That'll
Yeah.
be the work plan subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we filled in January and February just to try to give us a 6-month kind of headroom way. But as we typically do, the work plan subcommittee, once formed, will sort of make our calendar year plan for next year. Anyone else with questions or comments?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Cindy. And as I'm looking around, I'm actually forgot to remind members of the public, when we call for public comments, you're welcome, and it's optional to turn your video on when you speak. But for other portions of the meeting, when the commission is talking about issues, we ask you to keep your videos off. Sorry, I forgot to make that reminder. And then after the commissioners finish here, I will give the public a chance to speak on this item. Sorry, Cindy, go ahead.
No problem. This also might be a work plan subcommittee, but I can't remember when we usually review the CIP projects that are being prioritized. Is that as early as January, February, or is that later in the year?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think that we decided at one point to do a biannual CIP update. And I think at this point we would do perhaps a CIP update after the resurfacing and signage and striping project is underway. I think you are all up to date on all the other CIPs that we've talked about a bunch. Questa, the Ped Bridge, signage and striping, resurfacing. I think everyone's pretty up to date. We've talked about all of them.
And to add in a little more information for Commissioner Oyang is that Marisa was talking about the project updates that we do biannually on the CIP. And then I think we will continue the annual CIP project review when we went in the budgeting cycle. And that typically happens kind of in the spring leading up to city council's summertime adoption of the budget. And I think when the subcommittee for the work plan pulls out last year's work plan, they'll find a placeholder in the work plan that says annual CIP review of projects. I would expect that would just continue to be an annual item for us sometime in the spring or early summer, whenever staff has it ready. I know that's something that Jim works hard on and has been making sure that we can update and are part of every year. Anyone else? I am not seeing anyone else right now. So let's open this item up to public comments. Does anyone from the public have a public comment on this item? And you may raise your hand. That's an assumption that if you don't know how to raise your hand in the app, you may just unmute yourself and speak right now as well. I am not seeing anyone with their hand up, so let's close item 2 and let's move on to item 3. That's AB 43. The purpose of tonight's AB 43 item is just to get us up to speed on what it is. And we have someone who's very familiar with this, much more familiar than we are. And Jaime, I appreciate you taking the time. I don't know, Marisa, if you wanted to set this up, or should I turn it straight over to Jaime?
I think we can turn it straight over to Jaime. Thank you, Jaime.
Yeah, guys, thanks for letting me be here tonight to talk on this item. Can you guys see my screen? Just a quick confirmation.
Yes.
All right, cool. I'm going to jump into the presentation mode here. Okay. So the California Assembly this past fall approved AB 43 titled Traffic Safety. I'm going to walk you through what those changes through that new bill mean for the city of Los Altos. Come on here. Let's see. All right, a little slow. Okay, so before I get too far into it, I just want to take a moment to educate the commission and anyone watching at home. What is an engineering and traffic survey, or speed survey as the layman term, as most people know it. A speed survey is used by a local agency or a government agency for that matter to establish a posted speed limit for a roadway for any street that is not considered what's defined by the California Vehicle Code as prima facie 25 miles per hour. And what prima facie is defined as in the vehicle code is a central business district defined by local agencies' planning documents, specifically through the general plan, and any residential streets that are 2 lanes, 1 in each direction, and that are 40 feet less in or 40 feet or less in width, and have a classification as a local or residential street by a city's general plan. Now, a speed survey's life is roughly 7 years. Usually cities have to, at that time, consider resurveying a roadway to determine if their posted speed limit is still consistent for the traveling speeds of the public. But you can do a one-time today 3-year extension that gives a speed survey a life of a total of 10 years. So that's kind of the way speed surveys work today. So if you see a street posted 30 miles per hour, for example, that means sometime in the last 10 years, a city has conducted a speed survey for that roadway and found that 30 miles per hour is the appropriate speed. And what AB 43 does, which was introduced by Assemblyperson Friedman in Southern California, the law change that I'll walk you through won't take effect until no later than June 30th. And the reason for that is because there are changes that have to be made into the California Vehicle Code that are going to reflect the changes that I'm going to walk you through, as well as what's known as the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices for California, used by engineers like me to kind of follow a best practice, you know, for establishing speed surveys and the use of other traffic control devices within the state. So there are several items that are specific to AB 43 that change how engineering traffic surveys are prepared. And that's what I'm gonna start walking you through next. But before I do that, let's take a look at what's not 25 miles per hour within Los Altos. I thought that would be a really good place for you to start. So probably 98% of Los Altos, 95% is 25 miles per hour. It is local streets. The only streets that don't have 25-mile-per-hour surveys or speed limits are posted here. That includes El Camino Real to the north, which is operated and maintained by Caltrans. That has a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. Our highest travel speed in Los Altos is Foothills Expressway, operated and maintained by the county. So those two agencies, Caltrans and the county of Santa Clara, they actually do the speed survey development and management for these two specific streets. The streets that we operate and maintain in Los Altos that aren't 25 miles per hour include San Antonio Road from El Camino down to Foothills Expressway. That's a 35-mile-per-hour corridor. Homestead Road down towards the southern tip of the city is also 35. And then we have a few 30-mile-per-hour streets, Springer Road through the city limits, Fremont Avenue from Grant towards Highway 85, and Cristo Rey Drive down at the very southern tip of the city. So we have no 40-miles-per-hour streets, but we do have scattered throughout the city streets that are special district signed at 15 miles per hour in front of the schools, roughly 500 feet north or south or east or west of a school. The city has signed any street with the school 15 miles per hour when children are present. So that's the general makeup of the speed limit process through Los Altos today. And AB 43 is going to allow us to make very specific changes. So I'm going to walk you through first what we do with speed surveys today. I'm using a speed survey that we did for a different agency to kind of walk you through how it works, because I think that it'd just be easier for you to follow. But when we're doing a speed survey, we either use roadway tubes or we use a radar gun, and we try and get at least 100 vehicles traveling in each direction of a roadway, and we just plot what the results are. So we're looking for a minimum of 100 vehicles in each direction, and we use these S-curves to calculate out what's the 85th of the data that we captured for each roadway that we surveyed. So in this specific example, which was in the city of Millbrae, this eastbound direction of Taylor Boulevard had a 85th percentile of 27.2, but the westbound, which I didn't show you the graph for, was 27.7. So when we do speed surveys today, what the law requires us to do, or best practices recommendations require us to do, is to round the 85th to the nearest 5 mile per hour increment, and ideally set the speed limit there. So if we were analyzing this specific roadway separately in each direction, one side would be posted 30, and the other side would be posted 25. But current practice allows us to do a 5 mile per hour reduction from whatever the calculated 85th was. So in this specific case, 27.2 rounds down to 25, 27.7 rounds up to 30. We can do a one-time reduction of 5 miles per hour to 25. So this street was surveyed at 25 miles per hour as a recommended posted speed. That's the practice we follow in all cities. Now, at a policy level, at a city council does not need to approve an engineer's recommendations. So if the results here had been recommending a posted speed limit of 30 and the city council didn't want to do it, you don't have to sign your street 30 miles per hour. You can sign it 25, but that today creates what's called a speed trap. And that just doesn't allow a local police department to survey a roadway at 25 miles per hour. The only street, to my knowledge, in Los Altos that was previously signed 25 miles per hour that should have had a higher speed is Cuesta Drive, the portion where we've done our traffic calming program. My understanding is that there wasn't radar surveys done at that time, because before all the traffic calming work went in a couple years ago, the city council elected to keep that street posted at 25 miles per hour. That's my understanding, but I specifically have not seen the data from that past practice. Oops. Oh, so when we're looking at how do we justify that one-time 5 miles per hour reduction? We're looking at roadway geometry. Are there curves in the roadway? Is the street part of a suggested route to school? Are there sidewalks, curbs and gutter? Are there anything that would make the roadway slightly more unsafe if it was posted at a higher speed? So those are some of the contributing factors that we typically look for. So that's today. Now I'm going to walk you through what AB 43 does, because this actually is going to make it really flexible and really easy for cities to lower their speed limits on their roadways without creating speed traps. And that's really what the goal of AB 43 was. So first and foremost, what AB 43 does, it introduces as a evaluating factor of the survey what is called vulnerable pedestrian groups. And AB 43 defines vulnerable pedestrian groups as any factor of safety of children, seniors, persons with disabilities, users of personal assisted mobility devices such as scooters, and the unhoused. So if you have a roadway that has, say, more than 2 lanes of travel, say 2 in each direction, and you have a lot of these factors, these are things that are going to put a lot of weight in dropping a street more than a one-time 5 mile per hour increment, as I gave you in the previous example. So this is a new factor that will come into play as I walk you through the other evaluations. The second item that this does is it changes the 25 mile per hour prima facie definition. This has to be changed in the vehicle code. That's why the law allows until June 2024 for these changes to be written into the next version of the vehicle code. So remember when I walked you through earlier, today a street is prima facie 25 miles per hour if it's in a local agency's central business district defined boundary, or if it's a local residential street that's all residential, has 2 lanes, no more than 2 lanes, and is less than 40 feet in width. That's prima facie definition today. What AB 43 is going to allow a local agency to do is to allow the local agency city council or governing body to define what is prima facie 25 miles per hour. This is a really strong change because there are cities that are saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to do speed surveys anymore. All of our streets are going to be prima facie because we're a residential community. So that's the extreme implementation of AB 43 on one side. The other thing that AB 43 does for us is it introduces permanent 15 and 20 mile per hour speed zone segments. Today, we only have 15 or 20 mile per hour zone segments in schools or senior center areas. And in Los Altos specifically, we only have special 15 mile per hour boundaries along the 500 feet on each side of a school, and that's it. We have no 20 mile per hour boundaries in Los Altos. But we also are limited today to setting speeds permanently between 25 and 65 only. AB 43, I said 32 there, AB 43 allows speed zones to be set now permanently between 15 and 65 miles per hour. So remember when I said earlier in the prior example that a city can say, hey, we're going to establish a safety zone kind of our whole community and set the whole community at 15 miles per hour. You could actually set your whole city at 20 miles per hour if you really wanted to. I think you have to justify that, but it is something that you can do. The other thing that the law will do is currently today, we can only set prima facie a central business district, like downtown Los Altos. But today we could not sign San Antonio Road, say between Foothill Expressway or Cuesta First Street down to Edith Avenue as part of our central business district, because that's defined as in our general plan as a collector street for Los Altos. AB 43 would actually allow for 15 or 20 miles per hour on streets adjacent to the perimeter of a downtown business district, following a 30-day posting of that speed limit change where officers are only giving warnings. So for Los Altos specifically, that would allow us the flexibility to consider 15 or 20 mile per hour speed zones on San Antonio Road and or Edith Avenue. Something we would not have been able to do before because San Antonio specifically is a collector street for Los Altos. So I just got a few more and then I'll open it for questions. So in the example that I walked you through how we set speed limits today, and remember what I was telling you that when we use that example from Millbrae, 27.2 and 27.7 of the 85th percentiles, we had to round to the nearest 5 mile per hour increment of a roadway. And they were allowed only a one-time reduction of 5 miles per hour. So that example, things worked out for that street to be 25. But AB 43 is actually going to allow a city to post below a 5 mile per hour commit to a 10 mile per hour drop. So that is through the establishment of what are called safety corridors. So when we're going to have a posted speed limit that has a recommended speed that's 10 or more miles per hour below a calculated 85th, you still have to do an engineering and traffic survey for the roadway, but you can call it a safety corridor for reasons such as persons of concern, those children, the senior centers, the people with disabilities, the mobility devices, all those things we talked about earlier in the first change, following a 30-day period will allow us to actually have valid speed surveys that are not speed traps if a speed is dropped 10 miles per hour or more from the original calculated 85th practice today. And that changes then the definition of a speed trap, which is the final change of AB 43. So remember, AB 43, the current law today says if you have a speed survey that's adopted at your city council level that is a speed more than 5 miles per hour of a drop from the 85th, you automatically have a speed trap. And then that speed trap also says that if your survey is not valid to within 10 years, it's also a speed trap. AB 43 is going to extend the life of a speed survey to a total of 14 years. I think I see another typo that should be 7 plus 7 is 14, not 15, following the approval of an engineer. And that definition of having a speed trap be a street that is has this posted speed limit that's more than that 5 mile per hour change, that just goes away now because of the prior change on the 85th percentile of the establishment of the safety corridors. So those are the changes of AB 43. Just as a reminder, again, these do not take effect until no later than June 30, 2024. It could be sooner if the CVC and the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices of California are updated sooner, but most people are anticipating that that won't happen until that timeframe. But that doesn't mean people are waiting around for that to happen. There are a lot of agencies throughout California that are starting to do presentations like what we're giving to you tonight. And they're working on, well, what are those safety corridors that we want to be able to create? I think Oakland and San Francisco are even considering an early implementation, and we'll see what happens on the legal front for doing that. But for Los Altos, we are taking the approach of, we're going to take the first stab as city staff in trying to figure out, do we want to apply safety corridors along streets like San Antonio Road? Do we want to drop our downtown corridor streets to not 25, but maybe say 20? Do we want to establish permanent 20 or 50 mile per hour corridors along streets that do serve the frontages of schools, such as Almond Avenue, Berry Avenue? Like, those are predominantly residential streets as well. So should we use something lower than 25? And then have a lot of discussions with the police department to figure out, well, where are there strong pattern of citations or crash patterns, but we want to also evaluate changes to the posted speed limit. So that's where we are today at the city staff level. And that ends my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jaime, for your presentation. So we'll start with commissioner questions, and then I'll open it up to the members of the public for comments. And then if we have any final commissioner comments, we will take those, but maybe we can get done in one round too. So who would like to go first? Commissioner Katz, Commissioner Snyder, any volunteers? Commissioner Katz, you are first. Steve, can you unmute, please?
Sorry about that. I saw that this item is back on the agenda in October. Is the intent in October for staff to present to us what they're going to be recommending in terms of changes under this new law?
I'll let Marisa answer that question about the timeline for delivery back to the commission.
Yeah, so that was the original intent. And then we've had some internal discussions since I actually created the work plan. And so that item will probably get pushed out a little bit. I think next steps will be have some internal discussions between staff and the police department and identify some potential streets or areas, and then bring it back to the Complete Streets Commission at a later date.
Thank
We
you.
do have quite a bit of time with this since we have about 2 years before it goes into effect.
So just to follow up, then my understanding is that 2 years is a kind of a deadline at which point it has to go into effect. But if the city has compelling reason to do something in advance of 2 years, we can do that. Is that correct?
So the law, the way it's written, is very specific that none of the changes take effect until no later than June 30, 2024. So for the cities that are starting to implement changes, like what I've been reading in San Francisco and Oakland and a couple of other cities, those could be challenged. I don't know that Los Altos will want to do that, but we haven't started those internal discussions about where changes would take place and whether or not we want to wait or be a little bit more aggressive. We haven't started those discussions. The good thing is that none of the surveys that we have will expire before June 2024. So there isn't a real big push for us to resurvey. We can wait until June 2024.
Okay.
To be honest, I'm more interested to hear how's the county going to be taking advantage of AB 43 for changes along Foothill Expressway and Caltrans for changes along El Camino Real. So that's my interest. And that's another thing that we would want to research. So when we come back to the commission, ultimately to the city council, we have that extra information.
Other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Oyang, Commissioner Snyder, Commissioner Maloof.
Thank you, Jaime. That's very educational, and please keep us posted, I guess, educated, and as you make progress on identifying what streets will be candidates, would love to sort of learn more about that. So help me understand how AB 43 in hindsight, assuming hypothetically that AB 43 became active, say, in 2020 instead of 2024, how would it have impacted our thinking about Cuesta?
Well, one of the predominant drivers initially for Cuesta was wanting to be able to permanently reduce the roadway. If you recall what I said earlier, my understanding was that Cuesta, the only street the city had that was a speed trap that they couldn't survey with radar was Cuesta Drive. I believe that's true. And so that was one of the reasons why police couldn't enforce it. They definitely enforced it from the standpoint of people ran a stop and those types of enforcement, but they didn't do it for speeding. And so had we had this change or this law in effect in 2020, we actually could have done a lot more enforcement along Cuesta Drive that we weren't able to do 2 years ago. That's the biggest change. One of the other things that's defined within the law that I didn't cover is it also very clearly defines what the parameters are for enforcement. I didn't cover that in the presentation, but the law also says it is okay to enforce 10 miles above a posted speed limit. So if you're going, say, 32 in a residential street today, you may or may not get pulled over, most likely not. If you're going 35, it's kind of that gray area up to the police officer that's enforcing the time. The law does say now 10 miles per hour or more, you are automatically going to get a citation. And that also changes the enforcement pattern. I didn't want to cover that without having had the discussions with the police department, but that is another change.
Okay, so in essence, if I can restate what you said, the enforcement of the 25-mile-per-hour zone on Cuesta would have been possible under the new law, and therefore the question about Cuesta would have been one of enforcement rather than traffic calming measures. Thank you.
That's correct.
Other commissioners with questions?
So Jaime, in your comments back to Dean, you were saying that automatically the police can give a ticket if it's 10 miles an hour over the speed limit.
That's correct.
Is that part of AB 43 or is that currently with the current laws?
It's an informal practice today. It becomes part of the law at AB 43.
So essentially it doesn't do that much good right now because judges can throw it out.
Well, again, if you're traveling 32 and 25, you can get a ticket. The odds of you getting pulled over to get a citation are very rare, unless you're doing something else, right? If you're swerving and potentially a DUI,
Well, yeah.
well, that's a different story, but it's really up to the judgment of the police officer and what's happening at that time as to regarding whether you'll be pulled over at 32 versus 35.
Thank you.
Anyone else with questions from the commission? I'm just going to ask a question, Jaime. So I don't know if it's Palo Alto or if it's Stanford, California, but I've seen a sign over there that when you drive in, it says citywide speed limit 25 miles an hour unless posted. Is there a reason, with the exception of the school routes, and if we have 15 mile an hour by senior facilities, is there a reason we wouldn't want to consider an approach like that?
Actually, a lot of cities are considering that as part of AB 43. Now, in Stanford, I know the campus fairly well from when I worked in Palo Alto at the time, but most of the streets in Stanford, I think, kind of fall within that category, with the exception of the arterials where they kind of are coming in like Arboretum, which is a little wider. A lot of the streets fit the definition in residential areas that are 40 feet or less. That's one of the reasons they can do that, because they fit the prima facie definition of the existing laws today. There are other communities that we've worked with that are considering 25 mile per hour, just citywide, as part of AB 43's implementation. And then those are the specific signs they're looking at: citywide 25 mile per hour speed limits, and posting those at different gateway entry points of the community.
Yeah, thank you. I think, just to let you know, I think I've seen a sign near the Stanford shopping mall where they have, 2 lanes of traffic on each side of the road and stuff like that. Okay. So that was just my question.
That's part of the central business district, so that would be okay.
Yeah. So that's really just my question. Is there any disadvantage for our city to take that approach of saying citywide 25 miles an hour unless posted? And if there's arterials and things where we want a higher speed limit, like I'll just pick on Homestead Road. If Sunnyvale and Cupertino are keeping that at 35, then, we could consider that. And if we consider school routes, that I'm just talking out loud. But if we do the 15 miles an hour at school routes, is there any reason that we can't do that? I know I'm asking the same question twice, but is it disadvantageous to us in any way?
So there's nothing that would prevent us from doing that. Now, remember, we still have, if we know we're going to have a safety corridor, I'll just use Homestead Road as an example where maybe this, and I haven't seen the surveys today, but if the posted 85ths, if the calculated 85ths were 33 or 34 miles per hour, today we wouldn't be allowed to go below 30, but the city council, as part of their policy consideration, would need to understand, and that's a requirement. So we still got to do an engineering survey, but you can call it a safety corridor and go lower. But the city council would need to understand, hey, along those streets that I showed it on that map, all of these streets where we do surveys today, we're going to drop from, a 35 on San Antonio that has and I'm making up numbers here, 30, 38 or 39 calculated 85th percentile, we're going to call it 25, but they need to understand the drop is significantly below the past practice. We can do it because we have that flexibility now with AB 43, but that process of doing the calculation still needs to be done and taken into consideration as part of the policy approvals. And I don't know if the commission would have seen that historically. I don't know the practice of the commission seeing things like that before the city council. So that might be another thing that we need to talk internally about at the city staff level.
Yeah, oh, got it. But it sounds like it's conceivable to say 25 unless posted. And then for streets that are arterials or something, we'll look at the data and see if that makes sense. For school routes, it may be less or something, but otherwise,
right.
Okay.
Now with that said, it's always good to give motorists reminders of the posted speed. So even if you had that approach of, hey, 25 citywide, I would not recommend to the commission or the city council to take out all of the other speed limit signs everywhere else in town, because you need those reminders and they're good to have. So you can definitely do it, but I think there's some other considerations as well.
Right. Oh, right. And just because you have a posted sign upon entry, it doesn't mean you can't post the speed limit in different places. Okay. Yeah, it was just a question.
Let's go.
It's not a recommendation at this point. It's just a data gathering question. And less of a question, but more of a, can we please check with PD? Because my understanding from 4 or 5 years ago, when the Cuesta one came before City Council, there was, and I saw it at the time, in the packet, there were several streets and different segments identified where the PD was asking to raise the speed limits on those streets so they could enforce the speed. It was not just Cuesta at that time. So if we could just go back and talk to PD and see what was originally presented in that packet to City Council quite some years back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going to call for members of the public. Is there anyone from the public who has a question or comment on this item? You may raise your hand. I am not seeing any members of the public with questions or comments. So let's come back to the commission. Do commissioners have any other comments for this item? While I'm seeing some heads no, and while some commissioners are thinking about that, I see a member of the public who is raising their hand. So I'm going to call on Jen Well, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes to speak on this item. So you may unmute your mic, and it's your choice if you want to show your video or not, but you have 3 minutes to speak. I will be timing you. You're welcome to go ahead now.
Oh, hi. Thank you for giving me this chance. So this is my first time to be here. I probably don't know a lot of history and background of this, but the complete street, this name caught my attention because a lot of the community streets doesn't have the lines painted. Like in front of our house, there's no line, and it goes directly to Egan Middle School. And there's a lot of students biking, and there's also cars. There is speed limit, but with no clear lines, where is the driving lane, where is supposed to be the bicycle lane. I feel like so that's actually the intention for me to be here for the commission, because it's called complete street. So I thought there is an intention to make the street more up to standard in terms of the speed limit. Also, if there is a clear these lanes marked, I suppose the street will look much narrower, and then the cars will go probably slower because there's not such a big road that you can go left and right, and you can just probably go faster. So that's probably more relevant to this topic. Is there any facility or this infrastructure upgrade to facilitate this speed limit? I know, like in Palo Alto, down Charleston, Aristide Road, they're narrowing the lanes and making it from 2 lanes to 1 lane. Last time I saw it, and for sure the speed will slow down much. I guess it will be slowed down much more. So is there any like infrastructure plan to go with this law, this new law? That's my question.
Thank you for your comment this evening. Jaime, I don't know if you want to comment on that at this point. I know this is the first time that we're having this particular AB 43 before us, and it is scheduled to come back. So
Yeah, no, thanks for the chance to give a response. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so I definitely think that when we have these internal discussions over the next year with input from the police department, we're going to want to look at, if we make changes, is it necessary to consider some infrastructure changes along with that, such as making lanes narrower or making other improvements. The law itself doesn't allow you to say just take a lane away. That's not part of the law. But those are all things that can be taken into consideration. And so as far as lane lines on streets, there is a lot of changes that could be happening over the fall as part of the school complete streets master plan signage striping improvements that are going to be under construction starting in another month and a half or two that Marisa mentioned at the start of the meeting. But as a general practice within the city, we try to be mindful of the installation of a lot of curb markings and lane lines on residential streets to help those streets retain that residential feel versus, converting them into like more of an arterial feel by adding center lines. So at least in the near term, there might not be any change to, let's say, add lane lines if they don't exist. But if you do have a specific concern regarding the street for the person that was speaking, if you want to type into the chat, if you have that opportunity, the name of your street, or you can email us at transportation@losaltosca.gov, then we can definitely take a more focused look.
yeah, thank you, Jaime. And I think I will ask the member of the public if they want to reach out to you to send the email. I think we try to have the chat closed when we're in the commission meeting, and when we have community meetings, we have it open.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening too. So final call, I saw multiple commissioners saying they had nothing else for this item. So final commissioner call before I move on to the next item. Nothing. So let's move on to item number 4. This is Los Altos High School. I know we're getting an update. Marisa, I am going to turn this over to you to introduce this item. And I will just remind everyone that we are at just after 6:20, so we're about on time. And we were hoping to spend, we'll see if we can get this item done. Did we leave about a half an hour for it in our proposal? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Marisa. I'm the transportation manager for the city of Los Altos. I'm going to be giving an update tonight on the city, on Los Altos High School. It's going to be the transportation update for the high school. So this is the agenda for the presentation. I'm going to kind of give a summary of what's happened recently, and then we will discuss kind of the updates that have happened with regards to messaging and materials that have gone out to parents and families. And then we are going to talk about the goals that we've set for the Los Altos High School area and transportation situation. We'll talk about next steps for those goals. And then I will share with you the data that was collected last spring by the high school, and then some of the police department observations on how the drop-off has been going so far this year, so the last few weeks. So as a summary for anyone who's kind of joining us in this conversation for the first time, this is a topic that's been at the Complete Streets Commission a couple of times already over the spring and kind of early summer of this year. We received a lot of complaints that the traffic and congestion had gotten really bad around the high school, that driver behavior was a little bit poor with a lot of U-turns and illegal parking and stopping in driveways and in red zones. So that sparked a kind of ongoing collaboration between the city, our Safe Routes to School coordinator from Alta Planning and Design, and the Los Altos High School administration. And we have all been working together throughout the summer to develop messaging around the morning and afternoon commutes with regards to behavior and mode choice, and making some guidelines and suggestions for how to facilitate the commutes in a way that will be smoother for everyone. So a couple of recent updates. We did install a drop-off zone on Hardeen Drive. So that's the back entrance to the school. And we did that just before school started this year. And then we also had a presence at back to school night, which was just last week. So we had a table with information, we had maps, we had messaging, and we were promoting schoolroutes.org, which is our mobile app. This is the new loading zone on Hardeen. So the idea here is that parents can use this loading zone to do their drop off and pick up. And that's for the parents that are driving their kids to school. And this is with the intention of alleviating a lot of the drop off and pickup that had been happening previously at the front of the school. The drop off loop is closed at the front of the school still due to the construction. And this was hoping to alleviate the drop off that was happening on some of the side streets as well. This is our table at back to school night. So that is our consultant from Alta and Jaime. We're promoting schoolroutes.org, like I mentioned, and we're also giving out a bunch of maps and materials and messaging, which I'll share with you. Okay, so as far as messaging and materials that we've generated, this is all a collaboration between our Safe Routes to School experts at Alta and the high school and the city. And so we put together a few different things. We generated some new maps. One was mode options and travel times based on kind of neighborhood. I'll show that to you in a second. And then another one was the diagram of the school with entry points broken out by mode. We also, the school put together a kind of traffic flow map for kind of suggested routes of traffic through the neighborhood, trying to keep cars moving in kind of one consistent loop as opposed to coming in and doing a U-turn and exiting out the same way. And then we had our suggested routes map, which were reviewed by this commission during the Complete Streets Master Plan process. And as far as messaging to families, I wrote a letter to parents asking, kind of welcoming everyone back to school. I'll give more detail on that in a minute, and then kind of laying out some guidelines for the morning and afternoon commutes. And Andrean and I, the Safe Routes to School coordinator, also put together a video message to parents that will be distributed by the school. So these are some of our new materials generated by Alta Planning and Design. This is the morning and afternoon commute guidelines. And this is the diagram of the school campus, and it shows the bicycle and ped entrance at the front. It shows the bike entrance and the ped entrance in the back. It shows the new loading zone on Hardeen, and it has some text information as well, things not to do down here in the red box, and then suggested drop-off areas for each grade by grade. So we were asking for 11th and 12th graders to be dropped off 1 to 2 blocks away from school and to walk the remaining 2 blocks onto campus. So that's an effort to just spread out the traffic load. And then we were asking 9th and 10th grade students to be dropped off at the new loading zone on Hardeen. And this was another new map that was generated. And this is the enrollment boundary of Los Altos High School, is the kind of light pinkish color. And then this shows different suggested modes and travel times based on how far away from school you are. So it shows a ring for the kind of half-mile radius. And we're really targeting those neighborhoods to walk and bike. And then another ring for the 1 mile radius, also asking those neighborhoods to walk and bike, and then another 2 mile ring. And so that's kind of the, bike ride or carpool ring. And we also included some of the same messaging, and this was in the letter to parents. We had some information on kind of the health benefits of walking and biking and active transportation to school. We encourage people to find a neighbor or a friend and to walk or bike together. We're encouraging carpooling. And of course, we were advertising at schoolroutes.org, our new app. This is a summary of the letter to parents that went out. The full letter is included in the packet. I just wanted to give some kind of highlights here. So we kind of wanted to tell parents that this was something that we'd really been working on, and that we developed this partnership between the city, the Safe Routes to School expert consultants, and the school administration. And we wanted to kind of set the tone, saying that, we knew that the drop off and pickup had been chaotic and difficult recently, and wanted to kind of mention that The school was founded, in the 1950s, and that was a time when walking and biking to school was a lot more common, and drop off via vehicle was much less common. And so the way that the neighborhood is laid out, doesn't support the current traffic volumes, and the neighborhood just wasn't designed for this. We're really asking for everyone's collaboration and working together to make the commute times safer and smoother for everyone. And we just really encouraged and asked everyone to do their part. So we encouraged walking and biking and carpooling. We talked about the health benefits of walking and biking. We encouraged, again, students to find a friend or a neighbor and to walk and bike together, and how that can be a way to make new friends. We asked parent drivers and student drivers to be courteous and thoughtful and to not make U-turns. We really kind of emphasized how taxing that is on the efficiency of the road network. Asked people not to block driveways or do any illegal parking. We announced the new loading zone, and we asked parents to use that. We asked for the drop off and pick up 1 to 2 blocks away from campus, and encouraging students to walk the rest of the way, especially for the 11th and 12th graders. And then we promoted schoolroutes.org in the letter as well. So that is the summary of messaging. So now I'm going to go on to another thing that we've developed over the summer, which is some goals for transportation at Los Altos High. So our first goal is to reduce vehicle trips by 10% within 2 years for families that live within 2 miles of school. And we did talk to quite a number of parents at back to school night, and a lot of parents were new to Los Altos, and they were really appreciative of the maps and all the materials that we gave them, really open to the suggested routes. And a lot of people did say that their students do walk and bike to school if they live close. Other parents lived in the hills and said that they had drive their student or carpool. So that was a really just interesting way to connect with everyone and get a little bit of intel. Our other next goal is to collect data on carpooling, continue to collect it, and to increase carpooling by 5% within 2 years. A next goal is to conduct a walk audit, which we're in the process of scheduling right now. It's going to happen towards the end of September. I believe September 20th is the tentative date. And I will send out the invitation to all the commissioners and anyone else who is interested. And then after the walk audit, we will formulate additional recommendations. A walk audit is something that's very common in safe routes to school planning. It would have happened at Los Altos High if not for COVID during the Complete Streets Master Plan process. And as we've talked about in here before, it's a way to get kind of the PTA and any interested parents together with some teachers and some school administrators and our safe routes to school consultant and some transportation professionals. Everybody gets together, they kind of circle up before the morning commute or afternoon commute and make a plan for who's going to go where, who's going to do observations in what locations, give everyone an orientation on what to look for and what to write down, kind of what to pay attention to. Everybody goes out to various locations around the school in advance of the kind of peak commute hour. And then does the observation, kind of write some things down. Sometimes you count, how many bikes or pedestrians you see. Sometimes you watch for behaviors, and always taking a look at the infrastructure as well. And then everybody comes back together after the, morning or afternoon rush and talks about what they've seen, usually referencing a big, printed out map and kind of writing down what happened where and what kind of infrastructure and programmatic improvements would be helpful to manage the commute times. So that would have happened already if not for COVID. Instead, we just did an infrastructure audit. So it'll be great to kind of see the behaviors and get some more recommendations as a result of that. And then our final goal is to measure the reach of the messaging program. We want to kind of see the percentage of parents who received the letter, the percentage of parents who clicked on the video, and we'd like to send out a survey to parents about messaging that they received, how it was received, if they found it helpful, how effective it was. So that's our last goal there. And as far as next steps, I have 2 pages of next steps for you. So quite a number of next steps still. One is to develop some goals and metrics for the School Routes app and usership. So that'll be something that'll be exciting to track. scheduling the walk audit in September, like I mentioned, and so we can invite parents and commissioners and residents and develop those additional recommendations. We'll be collecting travel data on either an annual or biannual basis, and we'll be tracking the trends in comparison to what our goals are. We already have some baseline data that the school administration collected in spring of this year, so at the very end of last school year. I'll be sharing that with you at the end of the presentation. We will be keeping an eye on the new loading zone and kind of, monitoring the effectiveness, monitoring the utilization, also potentially do a survey to parents or students about that to see, how it's been received, how they like it, if they find it useful, any kind of recommendations or feedback. We'll be monitoring the school area circulation on an ongoing basis just to kind of be evaluating the effectiveness of all this messaging that we've sent out to see if things are looking better than they looked last year, see if there's been any impact in commute behavior, any changes to circulation. We'll be refining the neighborhood circulation maps that the school put together. And we will conduct those surveys that I mentioned on the effectiveness and the reach of the messaging. We're going to look into restricting left turns at key areas. So that'll be kind of exiting the school driveway potentially, and also some other maybe key intersections in the neighborhood. That would be kind of like a time of day, no left turn restriction. Because as we've talked about in the past, left turns are more disruptive to traffic because the driver has to wait for both directions of oncoming traffic to clear. So if we just have more right turns, it's a lot less of a efficiency loss. We plan to continue delivering the video and written messaging to parents. So the video messaging is something that we might do a couple of times a year or maybe once a month, depending on what kind of information we have to share. And that'll be an ongoing basis as we are continuing to kind of fine tune all of these things. And we'll of course be sending out, reminders of previous messaging just to make sure everything is fresh. We'll be monitoring the usership of schoolroutes.org for carpool, walking and biking commute groups. And then as a longer term goal, after the school construction is complete, we'll be reassessing the school circulation then. Another thing that I didn't include in here that I probably should have is using the messaging and materials that have been developed for Los Altos High as kind of a template for other schools in Los Altos. So rolling it out to other schools as well. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through some of the data that was collected. And just as a reminder, this data was collected in the spring semester of last school year. So, roughly 6 months ago now. This is our travel mode broken down by mode share. So this shows the percentage of students who are carpooling, walking, so at the bottom, biking or rolling is the next one up from there. A couple of students take public transit. And as you can see, most students drive in either family car or as a student driver. This is kind of the same information in a different way. So the blue share is the active transportation mode. So you can see almost half of the students are using active transportation. And then small percentage on public transit and the majority, 53% via car. I put together a survey for the high school students on the Almond Avenue cycle track. And so that was really interesting to kind of get student, feedback on the cycle track. So the next few slides are about that. The previous slides that I showed you were kind of our baseline condition as far as mode share, and that's what we'll be comparing to in the future as we continue to collect further data. So there were 190 students who responded to the survey saying that they bike to school. And out of those, 138 students, so they use the cycle track either daily or several times per week. So it's having a pretty big reach. And then we asked some questions about how the cycle track has changed students' attitude towards biking to school. So we asked, how does the cycle track make you feel riding to school? And so these are the different categories. So, much more comfortable, slightly more comfortable. Those are the dark blue and the kind of dark orange numbers, so 26 and 28%. So 54% of students who bike to school feel either slightly more or much more comfortable biking to school with the addition of the new cycle track on Almond Avenue. 38% said they feel roughly the same as before. A couple of people said they feel less comfortable, so I'd be curious to get some more information there. And this is where drop-offs are happening. This is as of last school year, again, spring semester. So this will be an interesting thing to compare to in the future as we have the new loading zone on Hardin. And kind of asking about the, requesting the, park and kind of walk the last couple of blocks to school. So that's something we can kind of monitor to see if people are actually doing that. And so this kind of gives you just a breakdown of where people are dropping off now. So the dark blue is on Hardin Drive, the 28%. And then the light blue is the streets kind of south of Almond Avenue, which was another area kind of targeted as a park and walk area. And then the dark orange is the streets north of Hardin Drive. So that's kind of like Conchita and Los Niños and all of those. And the light yellow is the streets north of Almond Ave, which I'll have to look into exactly. I think that means Valencia and Alicia. I chatted with Liz the other day from the Los Altos Police Department and got her observations. She's been out there most days with her crew, monitoring and encouraging the type of behavior that we want to be seeing. And I forgot to ask her how many citations she's issued, so I'll have to ask about that. But this was kind of her observations. She said, overall, the situation seems slightly better than last year, a little bit less chaotic, a little bit more organized. She said that the loading zone has alleviated some of the congestion during drop off and pickup. She said there are tons of bikes using the cycle track. And she said that most drop offs occur in the very final moments before the bell rings. So that's kind of one of, I think, the wicked problems that we're up against here is that most people, aren't spreading out their travel times. They really are just arriving in the last, final moments. And so that's really what makes the kind of traffic load tough in this area. So that concludes this presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. This is an update item. So Stacey, I'll let you decide how you want to handle the questions and comments.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving us this update. We appreciate that and the work that you and the team have been doing. I also see that we have the high school vice principal, Galen Rosenberg, on the call with us this evening. So just wanted to thank Galen and also let everyone know he's here and we can ask questions of him as well. And I think what we'll do from here is we'll take commissioners, everything, your comments, your questions, your feedback, everything in one go here. Then I'll open it up for members of the public to share their feedback as well. So starting with commissioners, who would like to go first? And sorry, I can't see everybody's video at the same time. So you can either raise your hand in the app or, oh, now I have all the videos. And thank you, Galen, for having your video on too. You're welcome to have it on, Galen, that's fine. I see Commissioner Katz, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Miss Commissioner Maloof too. Yeah, Commissioner Katz, you start.
Well, thank you. I wanted to just mention that on the third day of school, I spent an hour going around Almond School on my bicycle in the afternoon when school was letting out. And it was really an interesting experience. The one thing I will say is that the Los Altos Police Department officers that were there were doing an amazing job. And I spent some time speaking to one of them. And my experience was that the two-way cycle track works great for the students, but it doesn't work the way I had originally envisioned it. Think about this, you've got all the students who are emerging kind of like a fire hose out of the driveway. And if they're going west on Almond, all the ones going west are going west in that direction. All the ones that are going east from that driveway in the other direction, often riding not single file, but 2 or 3 abreast. So if anyone were coming the other way, there really isn't any lane discipline, and that might be why a couple of students find it to be less than perfect. I don't have a real solution to that. I think it works for the kids because there was no traffic really going the other way, and so they were able to get to where they needed to go. If someone was going the other way, like me, in order to avoid them, because the lanes are not as clearly marked as they could be, they tend to go around either on the sidewalk or potentially out into the lanes of the street. But the most interesting thing is I think that the police officers, with their experience, are really gathering a lot of data themselves. And I think they will have an enormous amount of input over the past few weeks, but also over the next weeks and months to improve what is working generally into a much better system. And I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Katz. And then before I move on to the next commissioners, I had also meant to ask Marisa and Galen as well. Is there, besides the questions and comments that you will get from commissioners, is there specific kind of feedback that you're seeking from us tonight? Anything particular you're looking for, Marisa, Galen, anyone?
Not on my part. So this is an update item. It's not a discussion item. So I'm not particularly looking for any type of specific feedback at this time. I just wanted to update everyone on the fruits of everyone's labor. We've gotten all of your input. So in the past at the last 2 meetings. So I just wanted to update everyone on what's come of that.
Okay. And Vice Principal?
If you have, so I am very interested in gathering more data on what's actually happening out there. I'm looking forward to the survey that we're going to be doing and the observations and then data gathering. But if you have any questions that you don't think we've already been considering that we could add to the information we're collecting, give us questions you'd like us to answer.
Thank you for that opportunity. Commissioner Maloof.
Yeah, first, let me say thank you to the city and to the school. I mean, this is a lot of activities, a lot of work, and I see that we've made some progress in at least the madness that was in place in the spring is somewhat more within containment right now. I wouldn't say it's been fixed, but containment. So thank you very much for all the hard work that you've been putting on the background. I would love for you to take into account also parking. I've seen that now cars are parking easily 2 blocks out from Jordan, across all those sort of feeder streets from Casita to Distal, Los Niños, Panchita. I mean, all those now have become parking venues for the students. So I think to the extent that we can gauge that in the data collection, then we can connect it back to what happens when the school reopens post-construction. What happens to the parking consideration? And how does that impact cyclists and pedestrians that are leaving the school or coming to school? Some of those cars park far away, or at least within those blocks, but then they make a U-turn when they want to leave. And then so that creates another set of considerations. I don't think it's a problem, but sort of another set of data points to add to the list of things that we're looking at. And I think the one thing that I'm not sure that I understand how the next steps will impact. How are we going to increase or decrease the number of folks who drive to school? I mean, I know we have a target of 10% over 2 years within 2 miles. Is that going to be through mostly just cajoling the parents and the students, or will there be some other forms that would invite, perhaps incentivize, or even at some point in time penalize that level of activity that should be replaced by walking or cycling as opposed to driving?
And does anyone have any answers to that? And if not, it's perhaps then a feedback point for maybe next time.
Sorry, were you asking if anyone has any responses?
Yes.
Yeah, it was sort of more thinking about, what are the things that you're considering to ultimately get the folks who are driving, especially those who clearly are waiting to the last minute to do the drop off. These are folks who are not paying attention to the messages.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how are we going to get those folks to change behavior?
Right, that's, I think, what we've been talking about really kind of over the course of the last couple of conversations. And so that's going to be a combination of all of this messaging. We have talked about doing, more of a robust kind of TDM program in the future. So that's going to be another next step. But this, and then there's the infrastructure component. So I think those are the kind of 3 tiers that we talked about in the past.
Okay. When do you expect to have the next round of data collected? I mean, how tedious is it to collect that data? It's easy to talk about data collection, but I can only imagine it's not straightforward. What is the process by which you're doing that, and when do you expect to have the next chunk of data?
Are you talking about the data regarding kind of like travel choices, mode choice?
Yeah, I mean, you presented data from the spring. I suppose you're going to have another set of data you'd compare to the spring and sort of say we made some progress or not. When do you expect? Help us understand the tediousness behind that, and then when do you expect to have that data?
So Galen collected that data. So thank you so much to Galen for doing that. I think that we could do it annually. I think we could do it biannually if we wanted to. I think we would kind of maybe want to be careful about, if we collected in the winter and then we collected in the spring, I think we might get slightly different responses just based on winter conditions. So I think we need to kind of control for that. And I think, we have the survey itself, we can tweak it, but I think Galen would be the one to respond about how tedious it is to send out the survey, and then we have to formulate the data after that.
It's definitely our intention to give essentially the same survey, so we have comparable data more or less at the same time in the spring. I am somewhat optimistic about the numbers changing in the direction that we're hoping for. It just is kind of a cultural thing. This morning I spoke with 9th grade parents, and my whole pitch was this one, and I got a very positive response. So I just think there's more conversation in our community about going in this direction. But at least as far as the data we've already collected, we plan to do the same thing. It's not so tedious. It's tedious on the user end that we can't survey about all the questions too often, or that people don't answer because they get tired of the surveys. We can definitely do this again in the spring.
Other commissioners with questions or comments? Commissioner Oyang.
Hi, thank you for the very comprehensive update, Marisa. My question was primarily focused on the success metrics slide. First of all, it was great to see that it's been kind of carefully thought through and laid out. I was just wondering 2 pieces of that. One is, how were those percentages set? Is it like something typical that we've followed before, or is it just our best guess at the impact that we could have? And then the second part of that is, I think in one of the metrics, you focused on those who live within a 2-mile radius. I'm just wondering, does that make it harder to survey because you're limiting the group of people that you're targeting? Whereas if you just said, if you didn't have that part of the sentence, would you have the same impact? Like, do we really care how far the distance people live from the school if we're changing the overall behavior? Those are the 2 questions.
Let's see. So starting with the most recent one, that's the freshest in my head. So that was something that we talked about, and something that we know and that we heard again at back to school night was that there are families that live in the hills, and so they feel like walking and biking is not an option, which I think is just a different group. And so we wanted to kind of be able to separate out the students that live closer, and kind of see those are the students that we really have the potential to impact, right? Their kind of behaviors and choices. So we just kind of wanted to focus on them since we do have some outliers. And as far as how the percentages were come up with, it was a conversation between all of your transportation professional staff and consultants. So myself, Alta Planning and Design, and Jaime.
And how do we think of those as like stretch goals or very achievable goals, or like what range do those fall in?
We wanted it to be like kind of somewhere on the kind of boundary of achievable and also optimistic, and kind of I don't know what the best word would be, but something that would have an impact and something that would be an accomplishment, and also something that did feel like it was within reach.
Cool. All right, thank you.
Other commissioners?
Yeah, question. First, Maria, thanks for the presentation. A lot of hard work involved in that. That looked really good. So what I was curious about was in previous meetings, we had talked about some updated signage or markings on Valencia to help alleviate the residents some of their concerns. And I was wondering if anything has been done with that. I didn't see anything in the presentation about that.
Right, so those signage and striping updates were put into the citywide signage and striping plan, which is part of the resurfacing project, the signage and striping that goes along with resurfacing, and then the safe routes to school comprehensive citywide update. So all of that stuff is together in one bid package, and that's what will be starting to be implemented in the next month or two.
Okay, so they haven't been implemented yet?
No, they'll be installed with the citywide construction project. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Marissa. It was a great presentation, and I commend both the school and the city working on this together. So it's great, and it was good seeing your table at the high school last week as well. So I have a couple of questions, sort of follow up on maybe very similar, but I think maybe asked in a different way. So you mentioned that most of the survey was done in spring, and then these were surveys responded by students and families. Can you remind me what the return rate of the survey was again? How many people actually took the survey?
Let me see if I have it. Galen might know off the top of his head.
That survey, at least the one that most of the data that Marissa took was from a survey only of students, not of families. And I think it was about a 50% response rate, somewhat more than that. So I felt like typical of the surveys that we get, it's a little better than what we often get with a survey like that. So I feel like it's pretty valid data.
Yeah, I think 50% is really good return. It's kind of rare that you get that kind of percentage on the survey. Marissa, you were going to say something.
I was just looking back at the data. Yeah, it looks like it was around 700 responses.
Excellent. And I think you mentioned that 44% of the data suggested they were active transportation, that meaning walk and bike to school. And I remember last time, I think, or maybe a couple of meetings ago, there was a proposal to do the new data taking using some sort of sensor network and so on, as to how many people are actually biking to school and so on. Or was that just primarily to do with Almond and the cycle track?
Sorry, can you say that again?
I think it was Jaime who mentioned one of his presentation previously that there was a proposal to do to take a data rather than just survey in terms of how many people are biking or walking to school. Was it specific to do with the Almond cycle track, or was it general data collection?
I can answer that question, Marissa.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. Yeah, so we did install a traffic counter right in front of the fire station to monitor traffic for the two-way cycle track as people are entering off of San Antonio Road. There is a GPU or graphics processing unit in that camera, but the algorithms are still under development to do automatic counting. So we're hoping that'll be done this fall.
Okay, so that would be kind of good because the correlation between your certain survey data and the actual data will give you some additional information as to how good the data is and so on.
Yeah, actually, I can say that the vehicular traffic counting is working really well. It's just the additional differentiation for the bicycles, pedestrians, and all this still, yeah.
Right. And then kind of an ancillary question to the cycle track. There was a proposal to install barriers closer to San Antonio. What is it? What's the status on it? And if the new data that you might be taking would be done post installation.
I can take that one on, Marissa.
Sure, thank you.
So we did purchase what are called the K71 markers. Those are the ones you see in bike lanes. They're about 6 inches wide, about 30 inches tall. We purchased about a dozen of the white ones for installation in the cycle track right at the fire station. And we actually worked with the fire station to figure out, hey, what doesn't impact the ability of a truck to be able to get in and out of the fire station. But it's planned for installation as after all of the other signage and striping work that Maurice has been referencing. And just to make sure everyone's on the same page, understands what's happening with that project, City Council award of the street resurfacing program, which bids closed earlier this month, is scheduled for City Council award on September 13th, if I'm correct, Marisa. So it would be about a month to month and a half after that City Council award that construction will start. And we've prioritized in the package the signage and striping work that is not on streets that are being resurfaced.
Thank you, Jaime. That's all the questions I had.
Okay, thank you. I just had two quick things. The first one is an idea for the survey. Since you're looking for ideas, if we haven't asked in the survey, why do you choose to drive to school, or why do you select the mode of transportation you do? It would be curious to understand the reasons why people are choosing what they choose. And for the people who are driving, if we understand the reasons why they're driving, then maybe we can help address the underlying issues, so then we can encourage more people to walk and bike. That would be my idea for the survey. It's also, we may already have an idea of why people are choosing to walk and bike, but as you increase the numbers of people walking and biking, it's not only why do you drive, but why are you choosing to bike? And that may be interesting too, because that may, if we do this survey every year, that data may evolve, may change why people are choosing to bike. When you get more people biking, their reasons for doing it may be different. I'll just say I'm a very safety cautious parent, and my end has been, I want the children properly educated and trained. And so having bike education. And the second one is the infrastructure along the route, not just by the school, but is the route safe? But for every parent, it's very different, because I know many years ago, we did a survey at Montclair Elementary when my son was there, and we asked why, and the answers are really interesting. So I think having that sense will be helpful. The second thing that I wanted to say is after, I think it was our May meeting or so, whenever this Los Altos High School was on our agenda last time, before school was out last school year, I went and did one day of observation in the morning on the Jardine side of the school, and another one on Almond Avenue. And so I'm glad that you've put in this drop-off zone, because I think that will be very helpful and valuable based upon what I saw in the back. I also thought the back was underutilized as a drop-off zone, so hopefully more people will be able to take advantage of it if it's a little less chaotic. What I did find on Almond Avenue, I was a little bit surprised that all modes were arriving kind of from all directions in all the same places. They didn't really have a lot of designated space. So I know the school has the construction zone going on, but it'll be curious to see, and maybe this can be done in the observations that you're planning to do with the team, is what is the impact of the drop-off zone on Jardine with respect to the drop-off happening on Almond? Has it taken that pressure off, or do we still need an additional drop-off solution on the Almond side? And that really means is something needed on the school premises, because it was pretty chaotic the day I observed. So those are the two comments I have. I'm going to now open it up for public comments. So anyone who would like to make a public comment, you may raise your hand in the app. If you're on the phone, I think you press *9. And if you're not sure how to raise your hand, then you can unmute yourself and ask to be called on, and I will call you. So anyone who wants to talk, please go ahead and indicate that you would like to be a public speaker for this item. I am seeing one hand at this point, so I'm going to call on Mike Emmerich. And Mike, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to speak. I will be timing you and I'll let you know when your time is done. You're also welcome to time yourself as well. So please go ahead, Mike.
All right, thank you very much. This answered a lot of questions, but I do have a couple. And the last time the committee met on May 25th, my understanding was the committee requested that the city and Los Altos High to provide solutions. And prior to August 8th, no neighborhood notice was sent regarding the Jordan loading zone from the city or the high school. And I understand that the website had notifications in there, but as a resident, I don't think I should be expected to go to the school website to find out that these changes occurred. And it's been brought up before about the almonds drop off. And if we have a rainy season, my fear is Almond will still be closed. And I believe the comment from the high school was the issue of construction that made the loading zone a hazard. And one of the suggestions was have the construction limit their hours during drop off and pickup. And this would allow the loading zone in Almond to be open. I also observed parking in the loading zone during school hours on Jordan. And it looks like we lost 15 parking spaces. Well, all those students go to my street and various other streets, which is Los Niños. And, you know, my first thought was it's a dangerous loading zone because you have the bike lane on the left side and people moving in and out very quickly. Some of them are going to work, dropping off their kid, and you're going to have a bicyclist, you know, you have to worry about. And, you know, people are moving pretty quickly through our neighborhood and on Jordan. Another question that I have is Jordan, the loading zone, is it a temporary solution or have we even determined that yet? And let's see here, considering adding another pedestrian crosswalk on Jordan between the tennis courts and the baseball field. That was another observation. And it sounds like I hit my limit, or did I?
You have 54 seconds left.
Okay. And across from the tennis courts on Jordan, last year the city had no parking signs on A-frames. And what is the status of reinstalling those signs? They're gone. I don't know what happened to them, or I think people ran over them and they just haven't been replaced. And that side of the residential on Jordan is still being used as a drop-off. And I think it's been mentioned about the paint, red zones and signage for the corners on Los Niños Way and Distal and Panchita. The hydrants are, you know, sometimes being blocked. Wheelchair access on the ramps on Jordan there's cars parked on front of that, and parking on the corners appear to be a constant problem. And let's see, the school site mentions that no double parking is to happen, nor is U-turns supposed to happen, although there is no signage on any of the streets to confirm that. So people do it all the time, especially on Jordan.
So
and
thank you for your comment.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we move, if we close off item number 4, I just want to give the staff team and the team an opportunity if they want to respond to the comment from the member of the public.
I'm trying to just remember all the points that were made. One thing is that we did talk about a more enhanced drop-off zone for Hardin at a previous meeting, and that more comprehensive plan would separate the bikes from the vehicles, as you may recall. So that is something that we still have in the works, and we've submitted an application for a grant to receive funding for that. So we'll see if we receive funding probably in October. And that's something that we are hoping to move forward with in the future. So that's kind of the response to the kind of bike vehicle conflict zone. There were a lot of things there. I know there was the A-frame, no parking sign. Were you referring to the ones that were at the intersection of Almond and Valencia, for example? If so, I think those are still out there. I talked to the police department about them just the other day. And that
I'll
is.
jump in on one. I think a lot of people assume that the conflict we're concerned about with construction is construction traffic. That's not really what the concern is in terms of addressing drop off on Almond. It's that we're trying to protect the cycle track and not allow people to stop in the cycle track, because what happens is if we have a drop off zone in what used to be the pass through, people end up sitting in the cycle track, which negates the whole purpose. But when the construction is done, we will have an additional entrance to the campus. And then I think we'll be able to design a drop-off system that will not impact the cycle track. That's the goal.
Thank you for that. Jill Woodford, it's your turn for 3 minutes.
Hi, I just have a quick question or a statement. I would love it if we would test the no car school zones. They're doing it at 80 schools in Paris this year. They're doing it at a bunch of cities in the UK, all over Europe. They're creating these pedestrian and bike zones, and maybe we could pilot something like that. And I realize Almond is probably like a major collector street, and it can't go there because of the fire station. But maybe some of those other streets we could just close off to cars. Thanks.
And I'm not seeing any other people with comments or their hands up. I'm assuming, Mike, you just have your hand still up, which you can take down and so let's close off item number 4. And we're going to, I think before we move on to item number 5, because this is a big item and an hour-long item, I would like to just take a little bathroom break for everyone. And what I'm going to do is ask commissioners, please be back on time. I know we didn't quite have our quorum at 6:30 today, so I ask everybody to come back from this break on time. And let's have a 10-minute break. So it's 7:12. We'll be back at 7:22 to start item 5. Thank you. So we're about 20 seconds before we want to start. I have 3 commissioners with their videos on. Do we have a 4th person for a quorum? We have 4. We have 5. So let's go ahead and get started. We are starting item number 5 is the citywide traffic model. I think I said that before that this item is something that hasn't been to us in a long time, and many of our commissioners are new. So it's good to make sure everyone knows exactly what this is, get all our questions answered, and sort of see where this how it's working and where it's headed. Jaime, I know you originally set up this model for us, so I'm glad you're here this evening. And Marisa, do you want to kick this one off before we turn it over to Jaime?
Sure, I'll just say a couple of brief things. Just that Jaime is going to be giving this presentation. This is on the traffic model that we have as the city. And Jaime will kind of give you an overview of how traffic modeling works in general, what you can do with the traffic model, what you can't do with the traffic model, and then kind of give you an overview of how the city uses this traffic model and what it's used for and how it can help us in the future. So that's the orientation. I'll pass it off to Jaime.
Thanks, Marisa. Can I get a confirmation you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so let's walk through a little bit of the background first. So Stacy mentioned that we came to you once. It's been a while since we've talked about the city's traffic model. The model that we use is made by a company called PTV. The name of the model itself is called PTV Vistro, and we actually built the model in 2019. We were really fortunate as a city that we did a citywide traffic count. We count somewhere around 80 to 88 locations every year, once a year, to see how traffic is changing. And we got really lucky. We did it in the fall of 2019 before COVID hit. And so we used the model and when we originally established the model, we did it for 2 reasons. The first one was to be able to measure what's called level of service, or LOS, at intersections. We also just wanted a tool to be able to categorize and be able to compare traffic data over different years. So those are the 2 main reasons why we got the model. And we chose PTV Vistro as the tool to be able to help us do that, because the VTA uses PTV Vistro as part of their congestion management program, or their CMP program. So they have their own program where they count intersections every year all across the county. I forget how many hundreds of locations they count. There's about 6 or so they count in Los Altos, along Foothill, El Camino Real, and San Antonio, to measure what traffic is looking like on an annual basis. And so we actually had PTV build the model for us. And because they also built and managed the VTA model, we had a really good starting point of a model to help it get done quickly back when we did it in 2019. What we did this year in 2022, early this spring, is we expanded what are called scenarios within the model that I'll walk you through shortly. And we did that to be able to help other consultants that are doing traffic studies in Los Altos for private development to be able to do a proper what's called cumulative traffic analysis, when they're saying, hey, we got one project coming in and there's, say, 2 or 3 projects down the street, and we want to be able to make sure that each developer, as they're coming in, is looking at traffic from the prior 2 projects before them as well. We're all using the same amount of numbers for base years 2019 and for projections that are stacking projects on top of one another. That was the purpose of doing the model. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through just what the basics of what the model is. I'm not going to show you the model live, but I do have screenshots that I'll share with you. I want to walk you through what the model does and does not do, as Marisa mentioned, and then walk you through kind of how we plan to use the model. But the model does require a lot of maintenance, because it's only as good as the numbers that are coming into it. So we're going to have to do a lot of updating and monitoring of projects in other communities like Mountain View, whose private development influences traffic patterns within Los Altos. So that's something that we're going to have to do manually kind of every year, once or twice, but it's something else that is an element of maintaining the model. So it's got giving us good numbers. So let's walk through models. So there's really three main types of models that we use in the world of traffic engineering and transportation planning. And those models are categorized, what I kind of lump into three buckets. There's a level of service kind of analysis tool that's looking at delay at intersections. It's helping to manage your congestion. And it's really intended to help you kind of to analyze different scenarios as traffic's added on. That's kind of your traditional level of service model. There's models that we use for signal timing that are using programmed information at a traffic signal intersection to help figure out, like, well, what's the best optimized timing for an intersection? If you're coordinating timing, what's the best timing to use at an intersection based off the volumes of traffic? And then there's what's called a travel forecast model. Travel forecast model is the most extensive type of model that we would use in transportation planning studies. And you really only use that when you're doing very specific land use planning work, if you're developing a brand new or update of a general plan, if you're developing a specific plan in a large portion of your community that say is currently vacant or is going to go under transformative change. We do not have that type of major change that happens in Los Altos, although we may consider some projects transformative from the standpoint of scale. We don't have super large projects that would require for us to have our own travel forecast model, but the VTA does maintain their own county-wide travel forecast model that's separate from the CMP level of service model that I referenced earlier that we also use for PTV Bistro. So the model that we have now through PTV Bistro really checks off two of these three categories. We do all the level of service kind of measures and comparison work that we want. We can actually use it for signal timing coordination work, although we haven't kind of done that yet. So that we might start to do in another year or two as we're kind of coming out of a COVID environment. But it does not, again, do travel forecast calculations. Travel forecast is very, very expensive to do. The model itself costs a couple $100,000. It's more than we need, and the VTA already does that for the region. If we need numbers, you know, like for when we're doing a general plan update, we always go to the VTA and they give us those numbers. That's part of us being a CMP partner with them in the county. So this is what the model looks like. I apologize that it says demo. The city's still checking off its renewal for this year. And so I was able to log in only as a demo evaluation, but this is our model. So the model, again, has roughly around 70 locations that we're kind of monitoring throughout the community. All of the locations kind of vary as either traffic signals or always stops or kind of stop control locations. We also just have some mid-block locations where we're just counting how much traffic is happening on a corridor that isn't necessarily an arterial, but we thought was a good measure of what happens for cut-through traffic in the city. And what's most important with the model is what are the scenarios. So what we expanded in 2022 this spring is the addition of these models, scenarios 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So existing was the numbers that we collected in 2019. And scenario 2 is when someone's analyzing a new project that is being considered for development. They plug in the projected trips of a project into scenario 2. But 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 are something that this commission specifically has been asking about for a long time. The cumulative impact of multiple projects on a roadway. So when a developer and their consultant team comes in and analyzes a potential site for redevelopment, they work with us and we tell them, hey, as part of your study, you know, look at this intersection. There may be anywhere from just 1 to several up to 10 intersections, depending on the size of the project. And then they figure out, well, how much traffic is going to kind of go, you know, east, west, north, south as part of the project. We work to figure those things out. And they actually plugging in those numbers at every study intersection to say, hey, of the 100 trips that are going north, when they reach, say, San Antonio and El Camino, of those 125 are going to turn left towards Palo Alto, 25 are going to turn right towards Mountain View, and 50 are going to go into Palo Alto towards Highway 101. So all that distribution kind of gets tracked within the model, and every project stacks its trips in the model itself. That's where the near-term scenario comes in. Near-term are projects that are under planning or have been approved but not yet built. That gives us the ability to let us hand this model to the next consultant to say, hey, here's the model that consultant X just did a couple weeks ago. You consultant Y can add your trips into the model, and we monitor that change. And then if you're looking here at this number, I apologize if you can see my screen. This is where the base year stuff is, the base volume input 2019. But then when we say total analysis volume for the scenario being analyzed, you start to see changes. This project's adding, say, 3 new left turn movements at this intersection. It's adding 6 right turn vehicles at this intersection. It's got 12 new trips, making a left turn. So the model stacks all that, and that's what the consultants change into the model for us. That's the scenario. That's the cumulative scenario. The near term cumulative is the models that we get from the VTA. 2040, what are the projected numbers going to look like? So again, our model, we have 2. We have one that's for AM and one that's for PM. With each of those scenarios, the scenarios are existing, and then they add their existing plus their project. We have the near-term cumulative, which is, again, projects under study or that have been approved but are not yet built, which really should be somewhere between a 5 to 7 year horizon of projects. And then cumulative is the projected volume for land use changes and any projected land use changes in our neighboring cities that the VTA tracks, and that's cumulative. That's really 2040 out year numbers. And lastly, we do counts every year still as a city at roughly anywhere between 80 to 90 intersections per year. 2019 still is our highest year's count. So our traffic volumes have not fully recovered from what they were pre-COVID. That's a great thing for the community, and hopefully they stay that way for a while. But what we do now is when a consultant's coming on board and they contact us regarding a project, in addition to us working with them to figure out what intersections to study, we can actually hand this model to them, and they are required to insert their numbers into the model. We actually also have a separate spreadsheet that tracks the projects coming in. So if a project studies a scenario with a certain amount of assumptions, say they're going to build 60 residential units, but at the end they only build 40, then we can go into the model, change and lower projections, so the model is always reflective of what was approved. And then us being able to do those annual traffic counts when the project's online, we take it off the spreadsheet list so that our cumulative scenario, that middle near term 5 to 7 year horizon, is always current. So that's the basis of how the model process works. And when we were developing the cumulative scenario, these are all the cities that we reached out to. We scoured their web pages to figure out what projects we needed to look for to add into that near-term scenario. I will be honest, we didn't have a lot of luck finding traffic studies that cities had approved for their projects. We really, it was easy for us to get what was being under analysis in Los Altos, for the most part, mostly in the downtown, at a couple of sites, and some of the projects along El Camino Real. But Mountain View, we actually had a hard time finding traffic studies. They changed the way that they post projects online, and they don't post their traffic studies for easy download anymore. I guess it's a change they made about a year ago. So we reached out to the Mountain View planning staff and asked them to send us the studies for stuff that wasn't approved. We actually only got a handful of traffic studies from Mountain View. At one point, we just had to move on. Palo Alto was the same. There really wasn't a lot of impacts for projects in South Palo Alto. We had 1 or 2 studies. That was about it. We did talk to Cupertino, talk to Sunnyvale, and they weren't showing any traffic studies that actually was projected distributing traffic into Los Altos for active development within their communities. And we did also reach out to Los Altos sales. They didn't have anything of substance either. So we did do a really big effort to look for traffic studies, but I think where we had the most success was just locally for the stuff projects that we were approving, and what we knew was in the immediate horizon along El Camino Real from Mountain View, which I think we captured the most important elements. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Jaime, for this presentation. Let's open it up to commissioner questions. And Commissioner Katz, you are first today for everything. You're on mute, Steve.
This is a question for Jaime. I think it's an interesting tool, but I'm struggling to understand how the city actually has used it or will use it to actually change something or to do something that wasn't planned initially. Can you give us one example of where the information that's come through this tool has been used to make a decision or to help with a decision that resulted in an action?
Sure. So the immediate ways that we've used the model is in partnership with private development work that's being planned in Los Altos. So we've been contacted by one consultant, Hexagon, who does work for us as a city as well. You may be familiar with them from other past presentations at this commission. But they've been working on a couple of different development projects in downtown Los Altos, specifically, I think, along the First Street area. So they've been developing those traffic studies, and they've worked with us and plugged numbers into the model. So the model that I had on the screen earlier was the updated model that I got back from Hexagon. So how we've been using it to date has been to be able to make sure that traffic studies, as they're being planned, getting ready to share with the different commissions, are truly cumulative with other projects that are around the same area. How we will use it as a city, we typically, again, we don't build large development jobs, but if we are going to say, consider a lane removal along a specific roadway, we could actually go into the model and say, hey, right now we got 2 lanes on a street like San Antonio in each direction. We want to consider potentially doing a 1-lane change onto a street like San Antonio. What would be the level of service change by doing something like that over the next year as traffic starts to recover more, and we need to look at more focused traffic signal timing work? This model will help us with doing traffic signal coordination work. I don't see us using that tool over the next year, but definitely within the next couple of years, I see that being a big need for us. But we'll have that ability to help model impacts from the standpoint of level of service and delay as another data point that the commissions and city council can take consideration when evaluating a project.
So then we will be using it for planning and projection, as well as for things like signal coordination, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay.
Other questions from commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Schneider.
Yeah, is this also used for the traffic calming studies?
I'm trying to think of a yes or no answer. My initial thought right now is I'm leaning towards no, unless the traffic calming project was a major reconfiguration of a roadway where we're taking a lane away or taking capacity away of the roadway, because then we could use the tool to manage changes into delay or level of service. But if we're considering it as something like, say, an addition of speed humps or something on a roadway, likely not a tool that we would use for that beyond just tracking changes in volumes of traffic.
Well, there was a traffic calming study done around 2019 and one, 8 years prior to that. So I guess this tool was not used for those.
Well, no, the county didn't switch to PTV until sometime around 2018. And
Well, this
we
is done
just
by
built a model in 2019.
These cities were, there were some of these studies done by the city itself.
I don't know.
Guess they didn't
It was
use- I
before
guess they-
2018, yeah.
Okay, and then you say you're only capturing the data once per year?
No, so we captured it this first time in the spring. So I think we're gonna have to be watching what other cities are analyzing from the standpoint of private development, and at least a couple of times a year, do another reach out to the cities to say, hey, what are the most recent traffic studies you are currently analyzing or approved in the last 6 months, say in Mountain View or Palo Alto, and then add any additional approved trips into the model ourselves.
Yeah, I would think that in order to get relevant or accurate data, you would want to capture it several times a year. If not, at least once a month, if not weekly or more often than that.
Maybe 3 times a year. Remember, most cities are like Los Altos, right? They go through a study process, and that study process can take a while. And so we should be able to capture cumulative data if we're doing this at least 3 times a year.
It just sounds weak that you wouldn't get that accurate of data because of all the changes depending on what day of the week it is or what time.
what we're all hoping for, but it'll take a while for this to happen, is that because we were one of the first cities after the VTA to actually begin to use PTV Bistro, is that like Mountain View, for example, doesn't use PTV Bistro yet. What we're all hoping is that everybody gets on the common platform, and we just move towards a web-based tool. And so as every city adds new trips in from a new project, we all have immediate access to them, within a couple of minutes. But we can't force a city, another city, to use PTV Bistro.
Right, I was just referring to our city. So, okay, thank you.
And go ahead, Vice Chair.
Oh, thank you, Alison. I mean, I think it's useful to sort of distinguish. I think I'm kind of trying to follow up with Commissioner Schneider's questions. I think there is some expectation that the model is more dynamic than I think what it is. What the purpose of the model is, and I think it's important to distinguish. For example, there's been one example is the model from streetlights and so on, which is a completely different way of modeling what the traffic patterns are and what it is used for. And I think there's some confusion between the two, and I think it's useful to distinguish why what's the difference between the models and what the purpose of the two models would be. You're muted.
I apologize. I wasn't sure if I followed the question.
Okay. I think, Commissioner Schneider was saying, why not collect the data on a weekly basis or even a daily basis when the data is available? And companies like Streetlights make that happen. There's a way for them to collect the data, they model it based on GPS and cell phone data and so on, which is kind of real-time data of what's happening and why that input is not, into this model, and what's the difference, I guess.
So the base element of the model is for us 2019. We have a better data set for 2019 in our model than we would be able to get from a company like Streetlight Data, which is doing a lot of estimating and rounding up and projections for the data sets that they capture through the remainder of a city. We were extremely lucky again that we did that 2019 citywide count that we have. And in fact, we've made that data available to anybody else that asked for it, like Streetlight Data. So our base model year is extremely accurate. Now, with that said, what we're using the model for today predominantly is to track changes in delay or congestion that are going to be coming from projects that are in a planning phase. Now, remember, by the time a developer decides to purchase, study, and actually build a project, that process can take 3 to 5 years in a certain community. And so the reason why I was saying that it's good for us to scour, 3, maybe 4 times a year, every quarter, like capture what those existing studies are in the different cities to help update the near-term cumulative scenarios. The existing highest year data for us that we want everybody comparing against will always be 2019 until traffic changes significantly out of a COVID environment. So there isn't a lot of value for us to be able to tie the model towards, say, a streetlight data set, which in my experience has not been as accurate and is extremely cumbersome to use. So a lot of people ask a lot about streetlight data. I don't know any city that after a free evaluation period chose to actually pay for streetlight data service because of the issues regarding accuracy of the data and, most importantly, usability of the data and ease of use for the local agency.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification.
I think I just wanted to jump in with a couple of comments too. I think kind of the purpose of this discussion in my mind was to kind of orient us as to, kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, just what the model does and what it doesn't do and what we use it for, right? So I know traffic modeling is something that's kind of an abstract concept to the average person who doesn't specialize in transportation. And so it's just hard to kind of get everybody on the same page here in terms of kind of painting an accurate picture. I think one thing to keep in mind is kind of to Tom's question, the traffic model and any traffic model for, pretty much any city is meant to be kind of broad strokes. It's not meant to track all the different traffic fluctuations throughout the day and throughout the week. It's meant to just be kind of like a baseline broad stroke situation. So if we have a general sense of, say how many cars are going down First Street, for example, on an average weekday morning during commute hours, the model is used basically by, if there's going to be another new project coming in, and that could be a housing development, or it could be a new, say, grocery store or some commercial development, then that data, how many trips would be generated by that development gets added to the data. And so then you have this kind of new broad brushstroke of, here's a general idea of what it's going to look like. So if you kind of imagine ants on an ant line, right, going through the forest, and then there's an intersection of two ant lines, that's kind of what the traffic model looks like. So it's just this broad stroke of how many more ants are going to be in this line at this time, and how much is that going to make this particular traffic light intersection queue up, like where will the line of cars go back to, and what do we need to do to mitigate that? And then we can ask developers to, make certain mitigation efforts in order to kind of counterbalance some of that stuff, or we can think about things on a holistic level to try to spread things out. Jaime, does that make sense to you? Does that seem accurate to you?
It's very well said. I love the ant analogy.
So
I had one follow-up question.
Yeah, please go ahead. And I actually want commissioners, because this is from 2019 and it is the first time it's been on the agenda for many of you, please ask all your questions, because it's important to have an understanding of this model, because this is the model when we look at development projects that were required to have a traffic study, or when traffic gets added, that this is the model that's used. So it's important to understand it. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you. And I think you pretty much summarized the next question for me. It was, can we assume that going forward, all the projects that come towards us have been run through this model? And has this model been applied to any of the projects that we recently reviewed?
So, let me try to start to answer that question. And I want to remind the commission that one of the things that you guys reviewed and provided input on earlier in the spring was development of a checklist of private development requirements when those projects are going through the planning process within the city. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marisa, but I believe, did that go straight from the commission to the planning books, or did that also go to city council policy approval? I don't remember.
So the checklists are under the kind of umbrella of VMT policy. The VMT policy needs to be approved by council. So
the reason why I was asking that question is because it's the checklists that you already helped review and develop that actually are going to be the requirement based on the size and type of the development that's being proposed in the city, that's going to set out what type of study happens. In addition to that, it also is going to set for what are the types of improvements that we're looking for, because while I focus a lot in my discussion about the model being used to track level of service, as a reminder, the laws changed in California about four years ago now, where we don't use level of service as a CEQA measuring tool anymore. We use what's called vehicle miles traveled, or VMTs. That's not to say, though, that we can't still require traditional level of service analysis study as part of a private development project. That's the purpose of having done those checklists that we did earlier in the spring. It outlines when a project is done. If it doesn't do a full traffic study, we always have them do, say, a trip generation distribution analysis. At that point, then it's our requirement as staff to enter those projects into the model, and not say a larger consultant's requirement that's looking at a bigger project. So it's a combination of us and the consultants, but not every project looked at the model if those checklists didn't require a cumulative near-term analysis.
Gotcha. Okay.
And Jaime, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like it would be safe to say that the traffic model its general purpose is to be used in kind of these planning stages, right, of some sort of new development, residential, commercial, whatever it may be. So a developer comes, they want to, do a new development. The developer or its consultant is tasked with putting together like a traffic impact report. And that's the point when the model is used. So the consultant will take our model, they'll kind of add whatever data their project would be adding. They'll take a look at it, and then that'll be the basis for deciding what new things need to happen, if there needs to be mitigation, if a signal needs to be retimed to accommodate the flow, if there needs to be a new lane added, or if a lane could be possibly taken away. That's really the point in which we're using it, and we're not using it really for much else in the city. That's kind of
Not
that
at this
point
time, not at this time,
project.
that's right.
So for example, the 330 distal circle had a lot of data generated, I guess, in spite of it being exempt from a bunch of studies, right? But there's still a lot of data presented as part of that packet. Was the model that we have consulted for that purpose or not?
The 230 distal, when
230,
was your internal discussion? I just don't, I don't have the list of all the projects that were added into the near-term cumulative scenario right in front of me. But we finished the development of this model kind of late spring. And so if the project was under development at that time, we did, because we got that information from our planning department. And afterwards, if it was one of the ones that Hexagon was working on, then yes, because they had access to the model.
What was the date? We just had this joint session with the planning commission.
It's just about 2 weeks ago, I think. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Yes, and we approved the project. At least this commission, Complete Streets Commission, approved to move the project forward. So that's what I was referring to.
And going back to the,
I know that there was a Hexagon report attached to it.
Oh, then if Hexagon did, then yes.
Okay, thank you.
Going back to the traffic calming question too, I think that was a good question. Traffic calming is generally intended to slow vehicles. So I think with cars, there's kind of, vehicle traffic, there's two things to consider. One is volume. So it's the sheer number of, ants on the line and how much those ants are backing up into intersections and kind of creating problems. And then the other issue is speed of vehicles. So traffic calming addresses speed. Traffic calming is generally not a particularly scientific process. It's kind of like cars are going fast on the street, we're going to put in chicanes, or we're going to put in, speed bumps or whatever that may be. There's toolkits of traffic calming. It's just kind of a menu of the different treatments that you can use, many, neighborhood traffic circles and things like that. And so, a traffic model is used to look at volumes.
I think that maybe an answering question. I've had this question asked by public in general. How do we differentiate? Does the model help us, differentiate traffic generated as part of our development? And I think Jaime, you touched on it a little bit. That is that development happening in adjacent cities, and then there's another layer of just cut through traffic in general. So are all these modeled as part of it, and does that help? Does the model help us differentiate between these three different scenarios?
So the scenarios being cut through traffic, and what were the others?
Development in the city, development, second being development in neighboring cities or jurisdictions, and then just cut through traffic in general. That could be, because there was a new office development that happened in San Mateo, for example, or somewhere in the 280 corridor or 101, what's the effect of that on cities' traffic?
So the first two, yes, the model does account for them, specifically in the introduction of the scenarios for near-term cumulative projects approved or in the planning process in this kind of what I'm calling the 5 to 7 year horizon, and also for the projects that are within our own city. So the model already captures that by us having reached out to the cities, gotten those traffic sites, us having plugged those numbers in, us doing that several times a year to make sure our model stays valid. That we capture on our own as a city, our own traffic data collection. I think I mentioned we study somewhere between 80 to 90 sites per year, traffic signals, always stops. Then we just do like mid-block counts, capturing volume or at locations that we felt as a city are susceptible to cut through traffic, like Cuesta, Arboleda, some of those other streets, Clark Avenue, things like that. And so we, by collecting that every year, can see the change in traffic volumes. It doesn't tie it to specifically say cut through. There are other models, and that's probably the one area where a data set like streetlight data is probably the most valuable, because it's capturing a GPS trip from San Jose, through San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Los Altos as a trick moving through the different communities if it's not staying on the freeway. So that does a good job of capturing cut through traffic, but our model really isn't focused in that. Although we can see volume changes and trend changes, we don't track a trip from its end to or destination location.
Okay, I'll leave my time for other people, other questions from other commissioners as well.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair. And I have two commissioners with their hands up. Commissioner Katz, I will come back to you. And I'm going to go to Commissioner Maloof now.
Thank you, Jaime. Thanks for this. Can you help me understand the circumstances under which your or the city staffs or engineer staff or the engineering staff confidence in the model would be diminished or compromised? What are the circumstances where you feel like we would not want to use that data, or we would not want to use the predictive outcome of that model? What potential locations within the city, what potential projects would not necessarily feel that the output is something that we want to trust?
So there's a couple of data points that I would want to keep a pulse on. So the first is how good of a job we're doing as a city in, again, going to those neighboring cities, getting traffic studies for the projects. I would say if we're not doing that at least 3 to 4 times a year, then our near term and our long term cumulative scenarios, they would not be good, because we'd be missing trips from other projects. Sometimes the threshold to say, hey, intersection is going to go from level of service D to E is one small project, and that's why one of the reasons why people moved away from LOS to VMT, because it wasn't fair to this small developer that built 10 units. He's the one that tripped it from E to F, when the developer before him that built a 200 unit project moved it from D to D minus, for example. And so there's a lot of reasons why those changes has happened. The other data point is, to me, is what does the project actually create or generate after it's built? So this is a discussion that Marisa and I had just a week ago. So traffic models, follow a very specific process. We use what are called trip generation rates that are developed by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE. And when the consultants reaching out to Marisa or I to say, hey, I got a project I'm working with a developer on, we're going to build a 20-unit condominium building, and these are the trip generators the IT trip generators that we want to use for the project, and we say yay or nay, and then we say, and expand your study footprint to here. But after projects are built in Los Altos, and almost actually in any city, no one actually goes back and says, well, your trip is supposed to generate 40 AM trips and 60 PM trips. Nobody goes back to count them. And so one of the things that I think would help, and this discussion Maurice and I had about a week ago, was like, hey, as projects are coming in and we're thinking about requirements for projects, let's require projects to have driveway counters. And so that when the project goes online 6 months after split, we can say, hey, we're projecting 40 trips in the morning and 60 trips in the evening. And you know what? They were really hitting, 41, 42, maybe that's okay. But the PM, hey, they were hitting 100. And that's a significant change. So at that point, then now we have data sets to take back to IT and say, hey guys, we are using your trip generation rates, but hey, they're just not jiving with what we're seeing. So when the next project comes through of the same development type, we can say, we don't want you to use trip generation rates from IT. We want to use trip generation rates that we calculated from a prior project. Those are going to be the tweaks that are going to have to happen over time. But at that point, we need policy support to tell a developer, hey, you got to buy a driveway counter, you got to give it automatic access to the city so that we're seeing those data sets coming in real time. And you got to maintain it for, say, 2 to 5 years after your project goes online. Sorry, long explanation.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. So, so I guess you would come back to this commission with some ideas on this thing, and propose what we can do more to collect data we can trust.
So Marisa have already started that conversation. Marisa, though, I'm forgetting the context through which we were having that conversation. It was one of the documents that you sent to me to review, and I recommended, hey, get the driveway counters in. But I don't know if that was through planning process discussion. So maybe I'll let Marisa kind of fill in that blank.
Yeah, that was the review of a specific traffic study report. So generally what happens is the developer or whomever commissions the traffic analysis study, and we will review, they'll kind of write out what their plan is for the traffic study. We'll
It's the
review
TDM
it.
study.
TDM study.
TDM study.
Thank you. So we'll review it and we will provide feedback on it if there's anything else that we want them to take a look at. So I think that was the process there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Maloof. Commissioner Katz, you had another question.
Yes, just a follow-up on that, which is I can understand how this tool can be used, for example, with all the new developments along First Street, as they come online, each developer then will have to deal with their impact cumulatively. What about major developments that happen right on our border? For example, the new school that's being built on Showers near San Antonio, and all of those new apartment houses that have gone up since 2019. Is our transportation department looking at that with this tool to say, how will that affect the collector streets that feed out and in, that go through Los Altos?
So really quick, so I'm going to answer your question in two parts, okay? Any development project happening next door, if they're developing a traffic analysis or traffic impact analysis, all we can do is just get our hands on it. That's part of that reaching out 3-4 times a year to different cities. And that's just monitoring stuff, the communities to make sure we capture those studies early on. But not all projects are required to develop CEQA or traffic studies, and schools, public schools are actually really good examples of that. Schools aren't governed by local government. They're governed by the state, and not a lot of schools, actually I don't think almost any school, with exception of maybe a private school that's operating under a permit within a city by the local agency, schools don't generate traffic studies. So if it's a public school, there would be no TA for us to review to enter that data in.
Well, that's a little hole.
Yeah. And to me, the other piece here is, there's a lot of new laws that are really working and geared towards making development easier, right? There was just oh gosh, I forget them. I think it's AB 30. I think it was just approved like in the last couple of weeks. That is exempting parking. It exempts a government agency from requiring minimum parking standards to be met if the project's within, I think it's a half a mile or a quarter mile of a major transit center or a corridor. So, unless the government agency says we're going to require the thresholds, because if we don't have minimum thresholds, it's going to significantly impact an adjacent community. So all these different laws are changing, some for good, some for bad. And that's been a big discussion, is like, hey, this new I think it's AB 30 that was just approved, like, will the Bay Area embrace it? Because it makes development almost too easy.
Thank you,
Other
Chair.
other commissioner questions?
You have another follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
You had said that there's this stoplight or traffic light data that we don't use because of several different reasons, but it uses GPS data to determine cut-through traffic. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a company called Streetlight Data. It's the Google partnership company made by one of a Googler, and they capture cellular phone data, and they use that to track and measure congestion. And one of the specific measuring tools that they offer, that it's the only tool out there that I've seen that is good for this, is tracking cut-through traffic to tell you, hey, if I draw a line on San Antonio, it'll tell you of this, all the traffic that we're counting through, 30% are coming from Los Altos Hills, 40% is coming from Sunnyvale. So it tells you the origin point of a trip, so you can kind of measure on your corridor to give you an idea about what the level of cut through traffic is on a street. That's the one thing that streetlight data does do that I think is good, but it's a relatively expensive service, and everything else on the platform hasn't been very user friendly.
So, okay, so yeah, I think that'd be really good to see where traffic is coming from, whether it's, Palo Alto or different cities. And I just was curious how they're using the GPS data for that. And so sounds like I wasn't quite sure how they would use that with all the different, cell phone carriers and so forth, but anyway, towers, but I'm sure they have somebody doing it. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up question. So you were talking about the schools and how the data is, the traffic modeling as part of the schools is not required and hence not captured. But I want to confirm but that would be captured on a future version of a baseline that you set, or is it also captured through any of your intermediate updates?
Thank you for asking that question. So yes, let me clarify. So when we do our annual kind of traffic counts, we'll capture any project that just came online in the year prior. So say a public school, even though it's not required to do a specific traffic analysis, like we would require of a typical developer in the city, we'll capture the changes in volume through our counts that year. Yes.
And any other commission questions? I guess it's my turn, and I had two questions. The first one I think you answered, Jaime. I was going to ask about how can we, or when can we benchmark our model, the accuracy of the trip counts that go in with the reality of what's happening, and you have told us how to do that. The second one that I was going to ask is, you talked about the purposes of the model, and then you've hinted at potential other future uses. So can you just give us a general sense of what may be some future ideas for this model as well?
Well,
this model.
Sure. Yeah. The first one that comes to mind right away is just having an integrated regional model that every city is automatically feeding data into. That's why when the city was looking for something, I said, hey, let's jump on the bandwagon with the BTA. I know there's some other cities in South County that have brought onto the model. It's just an issue of cost. The bigger your city is, the more intersections you got, the more expensive it is to build the model. I think for Los Altos, if I remember correctly, I think we paid somewhere around $30,000, $25,000 to $30,000 to actually build our model for us. And that includes all the data collection that we did in that first year to get the model up to date in the license of the model. So, that is a barrier for a lot of other cities. But that is the number one benefit of us using this model now, is having a real-time element in the model that the whole county can benefit from. Signal timing development is something that I mentioned earlier as well. We haven't used it for our models yet, because we have relatively lower volumes. We have the traffic signal set to kind of be dynamic and actuate really kind of more based off of the demand. And the only really area where we're trying to coordinate is really along Foothill Expressway and El Camino Real, and that coordination is handled and maintained by different agencies, Caltrans and El Camino, and the county on Foothill Expressway. And the county just turned on our new adaptive system, I think it was this spring, that they finally turned it on. And so those are the two main benefits that I see over time. I know there's a lot of change in the model that is planned by PTV to do a better job of tracking bicycle and pedestrian count trips. And so I think that as we expand our own tools to count bike and ped trip mobility, that element that we can feed into the model ourselves. But the model is very limited in that at intersections for turning movements.
Okay, thank you for that. And thank you for this presentation and answering everyone's questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Reflecting back to where we were in 2018 and 2019, I'm really glad you've put this model in place for us. So I'm going to go to public comments now. Let's go to Jill Woodford, who's been waiting patiently. Jill, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to speak, and then any other members of the public who want to also speak, you may raise your hand. Go ahead, Jill.
Thank you. First question I had is I don't see the traffic model data that was presented earlier anywhere on the Streets Commission website, and I'm wondering if that data is public with the map. The second question I had is there an overlay? I think it kind of makes sense, but an overlay on that map that shows the safe routes to school and any school zones, so that when we are looking at those levels of service, they could be in conflict with potentially children coming to and from school. I would like to ask the Streets Commission to consider pushing for a commitment from the city for a Vision Zero program. We've had a couple of pretty serious incidents lately. One was a neighbor who used to be a neighbor of ours. I was like horrified when I found out this is the woman who got dragged down the street. But it is scary, and kids are constantly, coming home from school saying, oh, so-and-so got hit today on San Antonio by some woman who didn't even see them and they had the green light, And so I really feel like there's a conflict of interest when we're talking about a level of service to move cars through the city and then making our streets safe for people who, for whatever reason, aren't in a car. Could we create a level of service for pedestrians and bikes in the city, the same that we have a level of service for cars? I did take traffic modeling and logistics in college. It was just a required course. We did all those math problems. And the one thing that really stuck in my mind from doing all those math problems and those models was that the easier you make it for cars, the more cars you get. And so I don't think for us, the objective should be to make it easy for cars, especially in those zones where we're talking about where, it's downtown or there's high density housing. It's maybe a frequented bike route by commuters. Like a lot of people bike down Cuesta actually. And then, the school routes. And then last thing I would love to just bring up as an topic here is, could we implement a construction tax for anything that's not an ADU or low-income housing? A lot of cities, when I talk to them about their traffic calming programs, they fund them through construction tax. And so I think you guys are the group of people that would help get, Marisa and Jaime and their programs that are making our schools safer and making our community safer. For me, we just sold our second car and I'm getting around on a bike 90% of the time now. I want my money to go to these kind of programs to make it better for everybody, the quality of life, the noise, everything. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill, for your comments. Any other members of the public who have comments, you may raise your hand, I think *9 on your phone, or if you just want to verbally indicate you want to speak. I'm not seeing any other comments, so let's bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Let's try to see if we can be, we spent ample time as we wanted to on the questions, but be efficient in our deliberation.
Stacey, can I just provide a very,
Yes.
very high level
Oh,
response
yes.
back to
Of course.
Jill? So Los Altos, like a lot of our neighboring cities, we do fund different projects in our CIP through what's called traffic impact fees or TIF programs. And so some of our neighborhood traffic calming programs historically have been funded through the TIF. So we are consistent with a lot of neighbors in that we use those development fee taxes that developers pay, to fund different projects. And a lot of them go towards traffic calming and school improvement type work already. So we do that. One of the things that I've seen a lot of other communities start to do, so much in the last year, that's one of the nice things that, because I'm on the consulting side, we both develop and see what a lot of other communities do, and then kind of bring those suggestions back to the communities that we work with, like Los Altos. One of the things that I've seen as a very specific change is as part of bicycle pedestrian transportation plan development, in your case, your CSMP, is a very specific tool called a level of traffic stress analysis for bicycle corridors. I don't think we got one in our current CSMP because that was just more of a peripheral update on the bike plan. But a lot of projects and grant studies have required level of traffic stress studies. We just wrapped up a few, and in Pleasant Hill up here on the East Bay. And so that would be a really good analysis for Los Altos to kind of maybe budget and plan for over the next year, is analyzing all of our streets. And then that becomes another kind of data and advisory tool towards the policymakers regarding, as projects are being considered, traffic changes are being considered, developments coming in, how does that impact or benefit the level of traffic system experienced today by bicyclists? And that whole Vision Zero element is part of that.
Thank you, Jaime. And before I forget, I have heard of some of the other cities in the county doing these stress tests for bicycle and pedestrians. So I think that's a great idea. Let's open it up to commissioner deliberation. And again, let's try to be efficient. So who is first? Anybody? Okay, I'll give it a go then. So I would say, besides, thank you for this update and educating also the commissioners. And it's really great to see the progress that's been made over the years on this model. I would request that you bring this item back to us and talk to us about how we can do exactly what you talked about, Jaime, to benchmark essentially the ITE numbers. Are these real trips being generated, or are they under measured or over measured? And I doubt if they're over measured. I think they're under measured. But what is our plan to begin that measurement, and what is our time frame to which we will have our own real numbers? When you guys are ready, I'd love to see the proposal for that. So if we have nothing else, I'm going to move on from this item. I think that's the most important next step for the team to focus on. So let's move on to, I think, staff updates is next on the agenda. Marisa, that's all you.
Thank you, Stacy. See, I'm going to pull up my notes as always. I think the major update that we have for you right now is just the bid results for the resurfacing and safe routes to school and signage and striping construction project that went out to bid, as we've kind of referenced a couple times in this discussion already tonight. A few weeks ago, we got a few proposals, and we will be awarding that bid, as Jaime mentioned, at an upcoming council meeting soon. So Jaime, unless you have any other staff updates, I think that is it for now.
Nothing on my side.
Whoops. Any questions on that from the commission, or any public comments or questions? I'll just wait a minute, and if I see neither, we'll move on. Commissioner Katz.
I just have a quick question for Marisa. Marisa, once that's awarded, will we get a quick report on how those projects are being prioritized?
Do you mean the individual streets within the plan set?
Well, I would imagine, not necessarily down to that detail unless you want to do it, but just is there a formula that you use? In other words, how do you prioritize what gets done first and in what order?
Are we talking about resurfacing specifically?
Striping and signage.
Okay, so let's see. The striping and signage came about through the safe routes to school plan set that we reviewed earlier this year. So I think the whole thing started because City Council decided that safe routes to school was a priority for them. So they allocated a specific amount of funding to be used just for safe routes to school improvements. And then we looked at each school in the city and made a plan for improvements along each kind of, in general, it's the corridor that kind of goes along the school frontage. And then as we received resident kind of requests and complaints and, different information like that throughout that process, we took a look at some of those resident input items for improvements around the city and evaluated them. And if we thought that they should be implemented, we included those in the plan set as well.
Thank you.
If I could just add on to the response, a lot of the priority implementation will actually be set in negotiations with the contractor once the contractor comes on board. The project specifications did require for the developer to prioritize signage and striping on any street that isn't being slurried or microsurfaced or has street resurfacing work on it. So we didn't want the school improvements to lag behind the larger construction job, which is the resurfacing work. But the other streets that do have resurfacing workers, like say St. Joseph Eva Avenue, for example, that's going to be staged with when the contractors bring in, say, asphalt work and doing other concrete work as part of the larger part of the job. So that stuff might lag behind. So we will eventually get a schedule, and during the monthly updates, I'm sure Marisa will be telling you, hey, we're going to be starting Eva St. Joseph at whatever month that the contractor has told us, and you'll be getting regular updates from her at that point. So but the non-resurfacing, non-slurry work, signage striping is supposed to be prioritized.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm not seeing other commissioner questions or comments, and I'm not seeing anyone from the public with a comment. So let's move to the next item, which is commissioner reports and comments. Anybody have anything?
So I have a comment on the Complete Streets Commission. When you go to the specific meeting date, like for today, August 31st meeting, there's a Zoom link there that pulls up to what we have here. The one on the above that, the Complete Streets, where it has all the members' names, there's right above that, there's a meeting paragraph, and it has a link in there which is incorrect. And that's the one that I used a month ago and I was 5 minutes late. So I think we should delete that or fix it.
Can you tell me again where that is located?
Just the top one for Complete Streets, the Los Altos city.gov complete streets, one that has all our names on it, all the members.
Okay, so it's on the Complete Streets Commission website as part of the city website.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. We've had to change the link a couple of times, and it turns out that link gets auto-generated in places we didn't realize and exists in a lot of places, so we'll fix that.
Thank you, Commissioner Snyder, for catching that. And yeah, the more, please because I know, Marisa, this may not be unique to us, so please let other folks know on city staff, because it's important that we have the right link for the public. Other commissioner reports and comments. I think I'm just going to say very briefly, I've requested a little more information to give us clarity on when MTC designates something as a transit stop, like came up, major transit stop, like came up the other evening, for us to have more articulation from the city why it's qualified as one. So that request is underway. And that's, I think, all I have to report this evening. Any other commissioner reports and any members of the public with comments on our reports? You may raise your hand as well. I am not seeing any of that, so let's look potential future agenda items. Does anybody have anything for the potential future agenda items? I always try to write these down somewhere. Silent tonight. I'm not hearing anything. Any public comments on this? I don't see any public comments on this item either. So we are at that time, 8:26 p.m. We are adjourning. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.